When the zombie apocalypse came, the lives of thousands of people changed. After all, the dead surrounded people and were encountered at every step. Each meeting with them could be the last. Therefore, a person needs to be ready. Mutants were extremely hardy and strong and could easily catch up with and knock an adult to the ground. The main character was an experienced soldier in the past, so he prepared to meet monsters. His task was to find supplies for his family and survive for their sake. He had to risk his own life, which he did every day. The streets were teeming with mutants, so he used a car he found on the street. But even that was not safe, because the monsters had intelligence and could pursue their prey. He had special equipment that was critical for his survival on the city streets. The man had to wear special armor and equipment that helped and protected him. There were so many zombies on the city streets that any walk for supplies could be the last. He had to break through because that was the only way to escape from the environment. There were really many of them. It was real hell. A person who was not ready would die immediately after the first encounter with a zombie. His car was very badly damaged. The windshield was broken. Stopping in a crowd of mutants meant death. Suddenly, the broken glass could not stand it, and one of the zombies tried to get into his car. The man did not want to die like that, so he started pressing the gas pedal with all his might. For him, it was ordinary everyday life. Such things happened to him all the time, and every day he had to risk his life. But now, he understood that the danger was real. After all, the zombies had overturned the car and locked him inside. The car became a living grave for him, and gradually the zombies began to surround him and climb inside. He couldn't die because it meant the death of his loved ones. He had to do everything possible to survive. It was scary, he screamed. But even a few months ago, he had no idea what awaited him and his family. He had a wife and daughter, and they lived their normal lives like all other people. But everything changed the day when people in military uniforms appeared on the streets of the city. It was announced over a loudspeaker that martial law had been imposed in the city to try to stop a new, dangerous epidemic that posed a serious threat to all of humanity. People had to follow the main news channels to learn about the spread of the infection and possible risks. The main character's wife was very worried about the epidemic because their daughter was still very young. To calm his family, the man promised to do everything possible to change the situation and ease their situation. Even in this difficult time, he tried to joke. The news reports reported that the number of infected people had already increased to several thousand people. From that day on, quarantine was introduced because politicians believed that this was the only way to slow down the spread of the disease. Rumors spread on the internet that it was a zombie virus, and over time, those infected allegedly turned into monsters. However, the professor did not support this idea and categorically rejected such statements. The man also did not believe in turning people into zombies, considering it only a way to scare the population and keep them at home. The main goal now was to earn money and stock up on everything necessary for the quarantine period. That morning, doctors went around the house, conducting a census and identifying the sick. From now on, they were supposed to bring food to all living people every few days, and in case of need, they could be contacted for help. There were almost no people on the streets because everyone tried to avoid danger and stayed at home. For the first time in many years, the main character allowed himself to sleep longer, because now he did not have to get up early and go to work. The supplies that the doctors brought could provide them with food for several weeks, so they did not have to worry about money. The daughter wanted to go out into the yard and play, but the father explained to her that it was too dangerous. They could not take the risk. To distract her, he turned on the TV, which reported that no new cases of infection had been detected in the last 24 hours. This meant that the epidemic had been stopped, and this news brought great joy to the people. The last days in the apartment had been extremely difficult, but suddenly the light went out. After checking the meter, the man realized that something serious had happened. The neighbors also had their electricity cut off, and now they didn't know what to do without it. On the streets, the police tried to calm the angry crowd, assuring them that the outages were temporary and that everything would be restored soon. Hearing this, people began to go outside, because there was no point in staying in their apartments anymore. The police tried to stop them, but in vain. Everyone was convinced that the epidemic was over and the danger had passed. Suddenly, a column of smoke rose a few blocks from their house. It seemed that the fire was huge, and it was difficult to understand what was really happening. To hold people back, the police were already ready to use weapons. But suddenly explosions were heard, and shooting began a few meters away. The sounds became louder and louder. It felt like they were getting closer. It was unclear from which side to expect danger, and the man, trying to protect his family, quickly led everyone back into the apartment. Suddenly, a stranger appeared on the street, running away from someone in panic. A huge crowd of zombies was chasing him, and seeing this, people, along with the police, rushed to flee. But they could not escape. The monsters were too fast and did not know fatigue at all. They caught up with the defenseless and tore them to pieces. Despite the desperate shooting of the police, there were too many monsters, and the bullets did almost no harm. Surrounded by a crowd, everyone was doomed, with no chance of survival. The zombies tore their bodies apart, causing people unbearable pain and torment. Then they began to penetrate the houses, destroying innocent residents on their way. Panic broke out in the city. Civilians found themselves in a death trap, unable to leave their own apartments. The man understood that danger was approaching. Now he had to do everything possible to save his family. His daughter cried in horror. She was extremely scared. They moved away from the balcony. The father quickly began to close all the windows and doors, trying to block any way into the apartment. So that his daughter would not hear the screams of people and the sounds of shooting outside, he put headphones on her. The man tried to convince her that this was all just a game and that what was happening was not real. Only after his words did the girl calm down a little and believe that her father was telling the truth. Then he rushed to the door to make sure that it was locked. But strange sounds were coming from the corridor. It became clear the monsters were already very close, and now their family was in the same danger as everyone else. There were so many of them that they could easily break down the door and get into the apartment. And at that very moment, the monsters began to bang on the front door. The man was seized with panic. If they broke inside, it would be impossible to stop them. He grabbed the phone, hoping to call for help because this was his only chance to escape. But instead of an answer, he heard a message. During quarantine, calls are prohibited, and if you need help, you should contact another time. In despair, he cried. At that moment, the man realized that they had been deceived all this time. In fact, the situation was much worse than they said, and there were many more infected people. Despite this, he had no right to give up because the life of his family depended on him. Soon the water was also turned off, and the people found themselves in an even more difficult situation. The main character began to check all the taps, hoping that at least one would be able to get some water. But all his efforts were in vain. Then he hurriedly began to collect the necessary supplies. It seemed that he had a new plan. He decided to use an empty bucket. He began to tightly cover the empty buckets to preserve even the remnants of water that were still inside. This was vital because most likely the water supply would never be restored. Despite everything, he continued to make attempts to call for help, although he understood that he would not get an answer. His wife cried. She had already come to terms with the fact that their family was doomed. Her husband promised her that they would survive, and he would do everything to make it possible. She seemed to believe his words because she simply had no other choice. None of them could have imagined that events would unfold so terribly. They did not even suspect how critical the situation was. It was clear they would have to stay at home for a long time, and the lack of water and food would turn into a real threat to their survival. Therefore, it was necessary to accurately count the remaining provisions and learn to distribute them economically. Fortunately, the last time they managed to buy a large amount of baby cereal, this supply was enough for a long time. Also in the pantry were a few kilos of rice, beans, corn, 2 packs of pasta, and some fast food. There were some vegetables, a few packages of yogurt and rice cakes in the fridge. They even opened the fridge door to collect some water from the condensation. After all, the water reserves were melting, and soon they could disappear completely. First of all, it was necessary to eat those products that spoil quickly and put the rest aside for later. But it was almost impossible to cook food without water. Now they had to figure out how to cook dishes because they could not eat raw rice. And suddenly the man remembered that they still had a reserve. 40 liters of water. It was stored inside the water heater and it could be used. It was enough to open the valve to get the much-needed vital water. After counting, they realized that they actually had about 50 liters of water, which meant that now they would be able to cook real rice. This news gave them joy and, most importantly, hope. They felt how much they loved each other and how grateful they were for their support and presence. But outside the walls of their apartment, everything remained the same horror. Soulless zombies continued to roam the streets. From time to time, screams could be heard from people who risked their lives trying to leave their homes in search of food and supplies. The only desire of each of them was to survive and at least someday return to normal life. They followed one another, and some, out of desperation, dared to take a step to leave their own apartment in search of salvation. Parents did this for the sake of their children, but almost no one could make their way through the crowds of the dead. At that moment, a brave man died. He fell dead right in front of his little son. Most of all, he wanted only one thing, for his child to survive, even if he himself was not destined to. For the boy, this was the end. He was left without support and his closest friend. Time passed and nothing around him changed. In the end, his father's body also fell prey to the infection. And the child, trembling with fear and shedding tears, only watched and prayed that it would turn out to be a terrible dream. But in front of him stood no longer his father, but a soulless creature, in which there was no heart or emotions left. He did not even feel pain. When someone threw a bottle at him, he did not even react. Seeing this, the boy was not only scared, but also felt sorry. Because in front of him was his own father, whom he had already lost forever. Some male neighbors, not realizing the tragedy, tried to perceive everything as fun. They laughed and threw things at the dead, not even thinking that they were once also living people. The poor boy tried to stop them because he couldn't believe that his father was not real. He felt pain and tried to protect him. Because of his scream, the neighbor missed and wasted a valuable bottle, which made him very angry. The boy felt very sorry for his father and asked him not to touch the man with the briefcase. Other people mocked him, claiming that his father was a psychopath or a coward for leaving him alone in the apartment. These words deeply affected the boy and he started crying. There was no more food left in them, and his father had eaten almost nothing in recent days, so the boy decided to go in search of supplies. Despite the complexity of the situation, no one wanted to share food with him. People ignored the poor boy and continued their business. Without hesitation, the men threw bottles at the monsters, getting great pleasure from it. They had fun watching how those bottles hit the heads and the zombies began to get angry. The zombies noticed that the bottles were flying in their direction and were looking for a way to get to the people in the apartment. Then the people stopped and came up with another plan. They lowered a rope and tried to throw it over the head of one of the zombies. After that, they began to pull him. This brought them so much pleasure that they did not even think about the consequences. After all, when they were left without electricity and were forced to sit at home, this was the only way to have fun. It was very interesting to watch the creatures that could not reach them. However, now the zombies have become much more aggressive. They began to create a pyramid, climbing on each other to get to the people. Very soon, they began to climb the walls of the house, and only now, the people realized how much they were wrong. However, now it was too late to change anything. The zombies began to break the metal bars. Because there were too many of them, they quickly managed to do it. Now the people were trapped, surrounded by monsters on all sides. They had no chance to save themselves because the mutants got inside their house. All the people watched what was happening, but no one felt sorry for them because they themselves were to blame for what had happened. Now it became clear that the metal bars were not a reliable protection against monsters. The man tried to collect the remains of water. He did this so that his daughter could drink. They were ready to do everything for their little girl and gave her all the water without even drinking a drop. When they watched their daughter drink for the first time in several days, then they realized that they were truly happy. In addition, the father came up with another way to cheer up the child. He managed to turn off the phone, and now she could enjoy her favorite game. And together they played it, and even such moments were very valuable and happy. The man invented a special generator with which he managed to charge the phone. However, for this it was necessary to turn the handle for a long time, but it was not a big problem. The phone charged very quickly and they could use it. They also constantly watched their daughter sleep and hoped that the next morning she would wake up. They had not drunk water for a long time, but none of them wanted to do it. Their lips were dry and they looked very bad because they had not drunk water, but none of them wanted to do it. But they understood that this could not continue or be permanent, and sooner or later, they would have to drink some water. Therefore, they agreed to do this right now, so as not to expose their own bodies to danger. They each drank a glass of water. Immediately, they felt much better, because it was their first sip in several days. Now, water had a completely different meaning for them. Never before had they thought that it was such a precious resource. The woman began to feel sad again, because sooner or later their supplies would run out and they would have to leave their own home for the sake of survival. However, she quickly calmed down. She did not want her husband to see her in such a state. The husband smiled. He was glad that even in such a situation, his wife was not upset. They tried to joke because it was the only way they could console themselves. Suddenly, the people heard a strange sound. It was coming from the balcony, so they had to check what really happened. Carefully opening the window, they saw a strange note lying in the middle of the balcony. The man carefully approached it and picked up the piece of paper. It was a note from their neighbor who lives opposite them. His child had a fever and needed to find medicine, so he tried to ask other people who were not indifferent. The man could not refuse him because I believe he really needed help. Now they had to come up with a way to give him the medicine. For this, he was going to use a rope because throwing them was very risky. He tied one end of the rope to the box, and the other he wanted to hold in his hands in case of need to pull it. And when everything was ready, he threw it. First, they needed to try to connect the rope between their own dwellings. Everything worked out, and they managed to connect the rope between their own dwellings. Now they could tie the medicines and safely pass them to each other. That's exactly what they did after a while. The man had all the medicines he needed. He wanted to thank people for their help, so in return, he sent them a package. It was water, which was critically needed for survival. He sent a note with it thanking the people for their help. Everyone was happy because it was a very profitable exchange. Very quickly, some people also started using ropes to exchange some necessities, but food and water were not enough for everyone and hard times began. The man had not drunk water since then and continued to endure despite the fact that he was very sick. He needed to find a way to get more water. He turned his attention to an air conditioner that could contain condensate and hoped that this would help him. He needed to make the motor inside the device roll manually, with which he could get the precious person. So he started to disassemble the air conditioner. He was so sick that he couldn't concentrate and focus his attention. However, he knew very well what he needed to do and tried to find the compressor. Unfortunately, it was sealed and it wasn't as easy to get to as he had initially thought. The man felt even worse because he had spent a lot of effort on it and nothing was working. His eyes started to close and it became clear that he was losing consciousness. His wife came to his aid. She saved him and gave him some water to drink. Realizing this, he became very angry because he didn't even realize how he had drunk so much water at one time. Besides, it was their last bottle and there were no more supplies left. However, she thought that there was no point in saving because he was dying. And if it weren't for this water, she wouldn't have been able to save him. Suddenly, someone knocked on their front door. Because of this, they were very scared, because it seemed to be people. In fact, it was a girl who somehow managed to get to their house. However, they were in no hurry to open the door and didn't want to let her inside. She showed them a bag of food and water that she managed to save and wanted to share with him, because she couldn't get to their apartment earlier because of the huge number of zombies. Delighted, the woman wanted to open the door. However, at the last moment, he stopped her, not allowing her to do so. He tried to calm her down and wanted her to behave quietly and not make any noise. She continued to talk and tried to convince them that she had a lot of water and other resources. However, the man replied that he was not going to open the door. After that, they saw the girl just leave. In fact, the woman could not understand her husband's behavior. However, it was impossible to believe that someone could remain so kind in such a difficult situation. He was convinced that they were trying to deceive them and come up with a way to get inside their house and rob everything. They were very upset about this situation. However, they decided not to open the door to anyone anymore. Suddenly, they heard the voice of their neighbors begging for help. Very quickly, they realized that they had made the right decision, because if they had opened the door, they would have been in her place. The same woman who offered them help was now dragging the victim's body into her home. After that, the suspicious woman returned. She again approached their door and began to threaten with a knife. She promised to return and take revenge. The main character tried to calm his wife and said that her words were a bluff and she was only trying to scare them. They continued to live as before. They only gave their daughter the necessary amount of water that was needed for survival. As before, they did not drink water, therefore their body suffered greatly. However, this time, she received less water than before. The girl wanted more, but now they had to save the liquid. The father tried to explain that she had to be patient until water appeared in their apartment. Then she could drink as much as she wanted. The girl agreed to wait because she knew that her parents did not drink anything at all. Suddenly, several shots and strong blows were heard. The sounds came from the bathroom, and very quickly they realized that it was the neighbors who were trying to destroy the wall that separated their houses. It became clear that it was a woman who was threatening them, and she was trying to find any way to get into their apartment. The husband wanted his wife to take the child, but she wanted to stay to meet him and protect their home. But he couldn't let her or their daughter get hurt, especially since if she stayed, she would only distract him. However, she was afraid for him and that he wouldn't be able to cope on his own. Moreover, their enemies were armed, so she left, leaving him alone. Meanwhile, the husband began to prepare for battle and gathered all the necessary equipment that would be needed during the defense of his own home. He began to prepare, and in order to protect his body, he placed a hard plate. He also wrapped his hand in a large layer of tape. After that, he began to collect other equipment and hid a sharp weapon in his clothes. The hole in the wall became so large that the neighboring apartment was visible. He was very nervous, but continued to wait, not intending to retreat. Then, he took a desperate step. In order to stop the attackers, he used a gas cylinder and lit a flame. He hoped that this would stop them and show that he would not give up so easily. But it had no effect. His body was pierced with a sharp spear that was made by his own hands. Opposite him, he saw a man who was his neighbor. He smiled and promised to kill them in order to take all the supplies. He ran out of gas and could no longer hold him back, so he started climbing into his room. The main character understood that he needed to try to attack first. However, he did not have time to do this and missed a painful blow to the stomach. He was very hurt, but he had to hold on for the sake of saving his own family. He started to fight, despite the severe pain and bleeding, but the enemy managed to catch his hand and block the attack. Now they started to fight each other and everything depended only on physical strength. The main character took a desperate step and tried to strike with his head. It worked, because his opponent lost his balance and the man managed to gain the upper hand. He found himself on top and tried to stab him with his own knife. To do this, he pressed his whole body against him. But he did not notice at all how the same woman who threatened them ended up behind him. Her face was burned because she was injured by the flames. She was hungry, so despite the severe burns, she tried to stab him with a knife. But at the last moment, the hero managed to dodge her blow. By chance, she stabbed her ally's hand and he began to scream in severe pain. Then, the main character again struck a powerful blow to kill her. Now the enemy had no allies left, and besides, he was wounded. The same fate awaited him? Everything was over and the enemies were dead. After the battle, the man felt very bad. His wounds hurt, and he was exhausted. He dropped to the ground to catch his breath. For the first time in his life, he had to kill a person. However, he couldn't relax, and right now, he was going to check what was in their apartment. The priority was water, which he was trying to find. To do this, he needed to go around the entire room and check every shelf. Suddenly, he noticed a strange closet. Opening it, he saw a huge number of human body parts. The smell and the picture made him feel sick. However, then he saw another object that caught his attention. It was an armored box, and it seemed like there might be valuable things inside. There was also a closet there, and he tried to check what was inside. Fortunately, there was water. But he was in no hurry to drink it because it could be poisoned. Enemies couldn't be trusted. In addition, he saw a key on the table. His wife continued to wait for him in another room with her daughter. And when she saw him, she was very happy. He was alive, and besides, he had found water. Jai's wounds were not deep, so they needed to be treated. There was no heavy bleeding, and he felt normal. Now, his daughter Kay could drink the water he managed to find. Despite the fact that his wounds were not serious, Jai was in a lot of pain. His daughter and wife did not leave him because they loved and feared him. His wife sat by his bed for so long that she fell asleep. But when she woke up, she noticed that her husband was no longer lying there. He got dressed and was going to fix the air conditioner so that they would have water. The woman could not understand where he got so much strength to continue working. In the neighbor's room, he found a battery. If he could, he would be able to start the air conditioner. He needed to do everything possible to get condensate and be able to produce enough water. He was very nervous that you tried to do everything right and very carefully so as not to break anything. And when he started the air conditioner, she really started to bathe. All the people were very happy because now they had the opportunity to produce at least a little water, which was so necessary for their survival. The next night, he lay awake, holding the neighbor's key in his hands. The woman noticed this and couldn't understand what he was constantly thinking about and why he was so tense. In fact, he knew about the existence of a small car that belonged to the neighbors. It was parked a few meters from their house, and he could use it. Hearing this, she started crying, trying to stop him. But her father didn't listen to her. He wanted to do everything possible to go in search of supplies and ensure the survival of his family. She cried, but even that didn't stop him. Very soon, they would run out of all their food, and there was only enough water for a few days. They risked dying of hunger or being killed by a zombie attack. He couldn't watch his family slowly die, and something had to be done. Even if it was a small chance of winning, he had to try, because he would never see his family get hurt. Now, there were far fewer zombies on the streets of the city, and he hoped he could get to his car and stay alive. But what would happen next? He didn't even know how to drive a car. He didn't have a driver's license. Jai was going to get to the nearest sports supermarket and try to find some food for his family. He hoped he would be able to find water, too. She didn't seem to be thrilled with his ideas, but she understood that it was critical for their survival and agreed. The next day, the protagonist began to prepare for his journey. He put on all the necessary equipment that would protect him. It was very difficult to say goodbye to his family because he risked never seeing them again. Finally, they hugged and he saw his girls start to cry. However, there was no time and he left, having only hope in his heart. He tried to move very quickly and did everything as carefully as possible so as not to attract attention. The events moved to our time. The main character was trapped. As before, there were a lot of zombies on the streets of the city, and they began to surround him. Now he was in real danger because his car started to burn and he could not get out. It seemed that the flames scared the monsters very much and they began to retreat. This gave the man a certain advantage, and after a lot of effort, he finally managed to leave his car. Despite the fact that his clothes were burning, he started moving and tried to escape from them. He realized that they were afraid of the flames because at that moment they could not get close to him. In order to protect himself, he needed to find a safe place, and he started trying to climb the tower. He threw off his burnt clothes and was very lucky not to get serious burns or injuries. After that, he started to run away from the monsters along the power lines. When the flames died down, the zombies started to chase the hero, not giving him the opportunity to break away from them. Now that he was on the other side, he needed to get rid of his pursuers, and he started to cut the power lines. Very quickly, a huge number of zombies were on the ground. But even now, he did not stop and continued to climb further. He was lucky because not far from him, he saw an open car and hoped that it would start and he would be able to escape on it. Also, there were the keys, and this meant that he had a new chance for salvation. He tried to carefully get closer to the car, after which he was ready to jump to the ground. He did everything so quickly that he was able to climb inside and close himself there. Now he only had to hope that the car ran on gasoline. Despite the danger, he tried to do everything carefully and calmly. He succeeded. Now he had a car again and could continue to escape. The man was moving too fast to avoid getting stuck in the crowd of the dead again. However, he didn't even notice that he wasn't alone in the car. There was just a zombie behind him who was about to bite him. Jai was lucky enough to see him in the rearview mirror, and he braked. The monster flew out through the windshield. After that, he continued to move, right into a huge crowd of zombies. He was forced to give them his own car because he simply had no other choice. If he stopped, he would simply die, and he would no longer have any chance to get out of the environment. Suddenly, he saw a weapon in his cabin. Jai was very happy because he hoped that it worked and there were bullets there. Now he could shoot zombies who managed to get inside his car through the broken glass. There were few bullets, so he tried not to waste them. Due to the huge number of mutants, his car started to skid. He was not an experienced driver, so he could not cope with the steering. Unfortunately, he flew off the bridge and started to fall, and the zombies who continued to pursue him began to jump into the cold water right behind him. Now, his car was in the water and its interior began to flood. The zombies could not swim, so they began to drown, suffocating from lack of oxygen. And when his car sank to a sufficient depth, he held his breath and left the interior. G managed to reach the surface, which was covered with dead bodies of monsters. This was the only safe way, so he did not leave the water. After a while, G became very tired and decided to stop by the pipe to rest. He understood that his strength was running out and decided to stay there for a while. Jai hoped that the place was safe and that they would not be able to get him there. He lay in this state until late at night. Exhausted, he fell asleep and slept like that for several hours. But he had a terrible dream in which his daughter Kori was attacked by mutants. This dream made him wake up. Now he had to keep counting, despite the terrible pain and fatigue he felt. Ahead there was a dark tunnel, but that did not stop him. There were a lot of ugly insects on his way. However, he continued to crawl. Now he found himself in a sewer where there were a lot of cockroaches and dirt. He couldn't get to the surface because he had no weapons and his pistols were low on ammo, so he decided to move through the sewers. He didn't know if it was safe and only hoped that the mutants wouldn't have time to get to the sewers. In addition, there were many other dangers there because everything around him was trained and could collapse at any moment. From memory, he managed to get to the local store, which was not too far from their house. Jai carefully looked at the street and realized that there were too many mutants. Suddenly, one of them noticed a strange noise. he heard the sound of a hatch. Therefore, the monster began to head towards the source of the noise, trying to find its new victim. And when the danger passed, he was finally able to get to the surface. Jai wanted to go through the back door, but the door was locked. He tried to open it, although it made a lot of noise. To do this, Jai put a lot of effort, but he couldn't do anything. He already thought about giving up, because he was convinced that he was wasting precious time. However, thoughts about his own family did not let him stop. He did everything only for them. At the cost of enormous effort and pain, he succeeded. The door opened and now he could go inside. The store was very dirty and dark. Also, he heard strange sounds, so he decided to arm himself with a metal pipe. In addition, the furniture and doors inside were broken, which meant only one thing: there were monsters there. Carefully and slowly, he entered the room. It was a room with shelves that once held products. But now it was empty. He saw no food or water. He was preceded by other people who were also looking for supplies and were hungry. After carefully examining the entire room, he saw a strange hole in the wall of the store. He did not know where this would lead him, but he decided to check. When he entered the room, he found himself in another room, but the feeling of anxiety did not leave him. Jai was very tense. He tried to move carefully so as not to make noise and not to attract attention. Suddenly, he saw a little girl in front of him, and it seemed that she was standing near a well with water. The man had hope because now he believed that he had finally found a source of water. But when the girl saw him, she was very scared and started to run away. She hid in a hole in the wall, leaving a bucket of water. Carefully, the main character approached him. He could not believe his eyes because now he could drink enough. He was happy because his efforts were not in vain. It was at this moment that the girl ran to her parents. Her mother was cruelly abused. She suffered terrible torment for the survival of her own family. Her daughter was very scared when she saw everything with her own eyes. The fat man got angry when he saw her and tried to hurt the girl. He threatened to feed her to zombies because she didn't listen to him, but her mother always stood up for her. Suddenly, he felt that there was a gun near his head. Now, the fat man was silent. He didn't risk moving because he was afraid that the stranger was a bandit and would shoot him. They all looked at each other. It became very quiet. The fat man tried to explain that he didn't really need trouble and they were all good people. In addition, he explained that he actually loved his child and was just raising her because she didn't listen to him. However, the main character doesn't believe a single word he says. In exchange for his own life, he promised to give him all the food and water they had. Also, when he offered him to eat right now, he wanted to do everything possible to make his own life better. The woman started screaming, trying to warn her husband because he didn't listen to the fat man because he was a traitor and a liar. With his own hands, he killed a lot of people. In addition, he took her own husband and now mocked him. Hearing this, he got very angry and tried to hit her. However, Jai stopped him. He started threatening him with a gun again. Suddenly, the big man grabbed his hand and tried to take away his weapon. In addition, he hit the main character, which made him lose his balance. Great, the advantage was on his side. He started threatening the main character with a gun again, but he did not give in to his provocations. He waited for the right moment, and when he did not, he dealt a strong blow, breaking his head. The dead body of the ugly man fell to the ground. When the woman and her daughter realized that he was dead, they cried. But they were very happy because now we could not be free. Also, she thought that the main character was a criminal and was ready to give anything he asked for, just so that he would not touch her daughter. However, Jai stood silently and watched them cry. He explained that he also had a daughter and he did not even intend to hurt them. In order to calm them down, he hid the weapon and promised not to even touch them. Also, it became known that during the quarantine, there were 57 people in this room and they were the ones who remained alive. Jai could not believe that the fat man was capable of such a thing and killed everyone else. He wanted to know what really happened and why everyone died. However, she could not speak. She just burst into tears. After the zombies appeared, all the people tried to find a source of water, which everyone was so lacking. Her husband was able to get to the water and was ready to share it with all the other people who also needed it. All the people respected him because he became their hero and savior. Also, they wanted to make him the main one among their group of people, and it was he who could give orders and manage all of them. Everyone trusted him, so he was ready to try to do it and take on such responsibility. However, there was another unresolved problem: food, which would also run out very quickly. Therefore, they were going to break through the wall to the store to provide themselves with everything they needed and continue to survive. All the people agreed to do it. Therefore, he began to break through the wall first, showing everyone his example. Of all the people, only the fat man behaved very strangely and suspiciously. He suggested that the man rest and was going to work instead of him. At first, he behaved normally and even helped people. They all became friendly because now they had a common goal for which they worked. People were happy when they were able to get a lot of food and drinks. However, sooner or later, the food would run out, and if they did not save, they would quickly start dying of hunger. He was going to give out food in equal portions every day, and the oldest in their group was to store the food. In addition, they were going to start growing their own plants and tending to the harvest. None of the people took his words seriously. They could not imagine how they could grow their own food. Also, they were scared that they would have to go up to the surface to do so. Now that they had water, they could also plant plants on the roof, but for that, they had to move the soil to the ground floor. If everything worked out, in a few months, they would be able to eat the food they had grown themselves. Everyone was delighted with this idea. Very soon, they began to prepare to plant the crop. First of all, they selected potatoes that were starting to sprout. After the land was tilled and prepared, the women began to plant the plants. They did everything carefully so that each plant would sprout. None of them doubted that they would succeed because they had enough water to water their plants. They just had to wait for the time to come for everything to grow. The people were happy. After a while, some shoots began to sprout. Then, almost all the plants took root and began to grow. Because of the large amount of water they were watered with, they grew very quickly. But one of the men could not help himself. He picked the crop and started to eat it, right from the ground. The chief did not like it, so he wanted to punish him. His behavior disrupted the order and left many others without food. He tried to explain to the man that now he was not just a sprout that could be eaten when it grew up. But the man was so hungry that he was ready to endure beatings, and the chief could not hold back. He beat him severely because of what he had done. When he returned, he met his grandparents. They were waiting for him because they had a very serious conversation. They checked that no one was listening to them, after which they went with him to their room. However, the fat man was watching everything that was happening and saw how Zhang beat the man who wanted to eat. He became very curious and wanted to listen to their conversation and find out what they were really talking about. The old people told him that recently they had been giving people as little food as possible, which is why the riot started. With the amount they had left, there was only enough food for a few days. In fact, there was only enough food left for a month, and in order not to cause panic among the crowd, they lied. Because of this, they found themselves in a critical situation. This meant that they would have to starve for a whole month until the potatoes grew. As soon as the food ran out, everyone would start eating the potatoes that had not had time to ripen. Because of this, everyone would die. They were also worried that a food war might break out and people might commit terrible crimes for food. They hoped that Zhang would be able to persuade the crowd to wait and calm down, and he promised to do so. The fat man heard their entire conversation. After a while, a famine began in the camp. The people refused to work because they did not receive food and had no strength. They felt very bad, and because of the hunger, they could not stand on their feet. Instead, they wanted to force the fat man to work because he, due to his large fat reserves, felt much better. In response, the fat man also mocked them and called them lazy because they refused to work. He also lied to them that he had food, which made them immediately stand up and try to make peace with him. The fat man began to ask them if the men were really that hungry. And then the fat man told everything he had heard from Zhang's conversation. He called the man a traitor because he had deceived his people. He also said that it was Grandma, Grandpa, and Zhang who had eaten their food and lied about having enough. When the men heard this, they wanted revenge. Immediately, they ran to Zhang, but before that, they took more people with them to make sure they had the upper hand. They all started shouting, demanding that they be given their food, which they all needed so much. They considered the old men traitors who had deceived everyone and eaten up all the supplies. Soon, Zhang came to them. Everyone began to tell him about what had happened and accused him of lying. However, Zhang could not believe his ears. He did not expect that the people he had worked so hard for would now start accusing him. However, many of the people were losing consciousness due to hunger. And then, Zhang said that the supplies were much less than they were told at the time, but explained that he just didn't want to cause panic. Everyone started whispering. They seemed to understand. However, the fat man couldn't accept it. He rushed at the man and tried to hit him. In response, Zhang dealt a strong blow that stopped him. Immediately, a fight broke out. All the people were fighting among themselves for the food. The fight was so fierce that people were seriously injured. Zhang ordered everyone to stop because this could not continue. He was saddened to see his once friendly people turn into barbarians who were ready to kill each other for a piece of bread. In order to reconcile them, he allowed the people to take their share of food, but warned them that the consequences would be terrible. After all, they would lose everything, and the harvest, for which everyone had worked so hard, would be destroyed. Because of his words, everyone calmed down, but no one wanted to harvest the food. The next night, all the men gathered on the roof of the building. The fat man tried to persuade them to carry out a coup and defeat Zhang, because he was a thief who stole their food. The fat man believed that Zhang was trying to do everything possible so that the people would simply die of hunger. And instead of slowly dying, they had to go and take their share by force. He wanted to kill everyone who disagreed with him. At that moment, he took out a knife, but the people remained calm. The fat man shouted, calling them cowards. However, in reality, there were not so many men who were ready to side with the fat man. Zhang had many more men, however, the fat man considered them inexperienced and hoped that they would be able to win. And suddenly the first man joined him, who was also hungry and considered Zhang a traitor. Then the next one joined, and gradually, almost all the men who were on the roof sided with him and agreed to fight for food. Suddenly one of them got up, his stomach hurt, so he wanted to go to the toilet. However, the fat man did not let him do this. Instead, he simply stabbed him with his own knife. No one could believe their own eyes and that the fat man was capable of such a step. The body of the dead man was lying on the ground. This was the first victim. Now, everyone had to touch his body in order to show their confidence and readiness for battle. The first volunteer who was ready to do this appeared. He took the fat man's knife and confidently approached his dead body. After that, he stabbed him right in the back. Finally, the fat man was truly pleased that he had managed to attract allies to his side. They started to descend and intended to find the main character and his team, but instead met his daughter. She did not suspect that the men were evil and could hurt her, so she smiled at them and wanted to give them a flower. Seeing her, the fat man was very happy because he understood that he could blackmail Zhang's head. After that, he became very angry and was going to kill the child, even though she was small and could not defend herself. At this moment, Zhang appeared, who ran to her scream. When he saw what had happened, he could not calm down. Despite the fact that he was alone, this did not stop him and he continued to fight them. He managed to hold off the attackers for some time. But because there were many more of them, he was seriously injured. In addition, he killed several of them. The dead bodies of the attackers lay on the ground. Because the leader was much stronger, no one could get close to him, and they were all afraid to die. With his strength and courage, despite his terrible wounds, he managed to stop the attack. At this moment, the fat man was very scared because he understood that Zhang would want him. In order to protect himself, he tried to cover himself with the body of his comrade, because of which he died. After that, he pushed the men away from him. Zhang tried to convince them to stop before it was too late because of his wounds, he could not continue fighting. However, they did not want to stop because they understood that they had a huge advantage when they defeated the strongest. The fat man tried to convince the people that they were on the right path. Therefore, they continued to fight and kill everyone. They managed to destroy a huge number of people and capture everyone who tried to hide, including women, children, and old people. They threw them down to feed the zombies. But that's all that ended there, because after that, he turned people against each other, and they staged a massacre, as a result of which everyone died. Only he managed to escape and stay alive. When the main character heard this story, he was touched. He looked around the room in which they lived and noticed that there were a lot of different tools. This equipment was collected by her dead husband. He believed that people would need it in order to continue to survive and in the future fight against other groups of people like him. The main character chose the most necessary things for himself that he wanted to take with him. After that, he decided to deal with the fat man. The man was unconscious, so he had to tie him up. He wasn't dead, but he had lost consciousness due to a strong blow to the head. After a while, he started to wake up. But when he saw the situation he was in, he got very scared and started to apologize to the man. But the man wasn't going to forgive him after everything he had heard. He started to undress him, taking off all his clothes. After that, he cut him into small pieces. He put one of them in his mouth so that his screams wouldn't be heard. Now, the woman and her daughter could avenge the death of their husband and father. They could do anything to get revenge, even kill him if they wanted to. At that moment, he approached the girl and gave her the metal stick. He believed that this was the right decision because now she could avenge the death of her father. However, he ordered that she not overdo it and accidentally kill him because he could be very useful. The girl agreed and took the weapon from him. She approached her victim and hit him on the head with her strength. Her mother joined her and together they began to beat him. Meanwhile, the main character tried to take as many supplies with him as possible because he believed that this was his loot that he had earned. Also, he wanted to eat, so he tried to eat as much as possible in order to at least restore his strength a little. After that, when he was going to check if his house was visible from this place, he carefully looked at the high-rise buildings, trying to understand if there were any living people left in them. And when he realized that there was no one there, he became very sad. There were no lights in the houses. It only meant that the people there were dead. Also, he looked into his own house, which also had no lights. Because of this, he became very sad and tried to hold back his tears. The girl understood that he was very difficult and offered him water. The man drank the water with joy and thanked her for it. She also asked if he was trying to find his home where his family lived. However, the man replied that his parents, with whom he had lost contact for a long time, were not far from here. He hoped that they might be alive and were waiting for someone to save them. She thought that he was going to save his parents and wanted to go in search of them right now. The man just sighed heavily. The main character was not going to do this because he did not have enough strength and resources to take them with him. He also told about his daughter, who really wanted water and was waiting for his return, so when he was about to leave, suddenly, the little girl screamed. This saved the main character's life because he noticed her mother trying to attack him. At that moment, he managed to dodge and grab her by the neck. Jai did not understand why she did this, because he saved her and saved her from terrible torment. Therefore, Jie began to threaten her with a knife and was also going to kill her. At the last moment, he thought about his own girl. He felt sorry to leave the child without parents. Therefore, this made him stop and change his mind. He let go of the woman, but did not take his eyes off her. Now he could no longer understand who he should be more afraid of, zombies or people. The poor woman was exhausted and lowered her weapon. She regretted her actions and started crying. Now that her husband, who had always tried to help everyone, had died, she had lost trust in people and could not believe that she had been saved for nothing. Also, she felt very weak and could not continue to protect her daughter. Jai felt sorry for her, but he could not change anything. After all, now all people were suffering and going through difficult trials. Human kindness was now becoming a weakness, and it was necessary to think only about their own survival. However, he believed that they still had the right to choose and could choose their own path for themselves. He admitted that from the very beginning he wanted to kill them both, but the choice to believe them almost killed him. He understood that if people did not change, they would continue to kill each other, and I would not be able to win for anything, and the apocalypse would never end. Perhaps her dead husband thought the same, and that was why he was dead now. Perhaps he paid for his own kindness and the fact that he trusted people. Hearing these words, the woman began to cry. She remembered all the moments that connected her with her lover. Suddenly, a shot rang out. This sound was very close, and the main character rushed to the window to check what was really happening. When he turned the binoculars, he saw a terrible picture. It would be about two groups of people who were on neighboring houses. It seemed that both groups had run out of supplies and now they were trying to kill each other. One of them was much stronger because they had armor and weapons. The bravest and strongest of the men were going to storm the neighboring building. They managed to break into the crowd and start destroying everyone in their path. The war was very cruel and neither side was ready to surrender. A lot of people were dying, and those who were the least lucky fell down, where they were torn apart by zombies. The battle was very cruel, and there was a terrible scream and poor people who gave their lives for a ghostly hope. The strongest had firearms and ammunition. Therefore, they shot each other from the stands and did not risk their own lives. In addition, people managed to invent powerful weapons, which became fire cocktails. They threw them into a crowd of people, from which they received terrible burns. But even this did not stop many of them. They continued to fight despite the terrible injuries, because the survival of the entire crowd depended on each of them. Suddenly, the main character saw his own parents fighting on one of the sides. He could not believe his own eyes, because he saw how hard it was for his father, and realized that they were alive. Now he realized that his parents were in real danger, because the Borgs managed to go over to their side and throw a net over them. After that, they were in danger, and the enemies began to beat them with their feet and other objects. Jai cried, but he had no way to change anything and somehow help them. He watched as his parents and other unfortunate people were beaten to death, and I wanted to throw them down until they were devoured by mutants. Also, the head of the enemy camp came to their side and was going to kill all those who were not going to obey him. The people who managed to be taken prisoner were going to be transported to the other side. In fact, they wanted to use them as slaves who would work for the enemy camp. His parents were one of them, and Ji saw their bodies being carried inside the house. The woman realized that these were his parents. They were engaged in the transformation of people, so they were allowed to stay alive. And then, the woman realized that most likely they would be prepared, because they knew a lot of important information about other people and the routes where there were the fewest mutants. Jai asked his father to be patient. He was going to come to his aid and free him from captivity. But the woman heard about his plan, could not believe how he would be able to cope with armed and strong enemies on his own. However, he did not know whether he would be able to win or whether he would be able to survive at all. But if he did not do this, then his parents would definitely die. That now she realized that he was actually very similar to her husband and spoke the same way as him. Therefore, she did not doubt that he would succeed and believed in his victory. For this, the man sent to the garage in order to choose the best weapon for himself and be ready for battle. He managed to find a huge amount of various equipment. He carefully examined all the objects that came across his path. Then he started tinkering, trying to assemble the best and most powerful equipment for himself. He used absolutely everything that came to his hands. After some time, he managed to assemble a weapon that could shoot nails. Now he wanted to test its effectiveness. He realized that with its help, it was easy to test the human body and inflict serious injuries. He continued to prepare, and now he needed to try to make some armor for himself. At the same time, he remembered pictures from his childhood when he was a little boy. During his school years, he was often bullied and did not have enough physical strength to defend himself. However, his father always supported him and made him stand up for himself. He knew that his son was not respected and beaten. He had weak hands, so when he tried to make a man out of him, the father wanted his son to finally become braver and start defending himself. To do this, he needed to take revenge on his enemies and make them stop touching him. His father kept telling him that he needed to be responsible and brave. He could lose the battle, but he needed to repay the same and never give up. The boy didn't take his words seriously, but he knew that he was telling the truth. He decided to listen to his advice and do everything as he said. After he returned home, even more new wounds and bruises appeared on his body. The father immediately noticed that something had happened to his son. When his mother saw what he looked like, she was very scared. However, Ji didn't say anything. He didn't want his parents to know about what had happened. But the father noticed the bruises on his hands and realized that he had finally been able to defend himself. He smiled imperceptibly and was actually very proud of his son. On the first day, he and his father were called to school. He was taken to the principal's office where he was forced to apologize to the person he had beaten. Even though he was not to blame for what had happened and was only defending himself, no one listened to him. The father of his abuser was very rich and allowed himself to call the main character names. But Ji's father supported his son in any situation and considered him right. Now, a quarrel began between the men and they risked a fight right in the school. Even the fact that there were significantly more opponents did not scare the man, and he was ready to take revenge on all of them for the sake of his son. He was alone against the whole crowd and had to defend himself. However, he very easily dealt with all of them and remained unharmed. Now, he was able to take revenge on his own son and became a real pride and example for him. This brought them very close, and the boy remained forever grateful to his father for changing his life. Meanwhile, he continued to tinker and tried to develop deadly weapons. There was a huge number of different tools in the room from which he tried to develop different things. One of these was a rocket launcher, which he filled with a lot of debris and sharp nails. He believed that this weapon would be truly dangerous against a huge crowd of people. Suddenly, a woman approached him. She gave him her husband's jacket because they had the same size of clothes. The main character thanked her for the gift and asked if he had any plan. But at first, he needed to get to the neighboring house, and then when he didn't know what to do, now he climbed onto the roof. He took the fat man with him. He was going to use him as bait. Therefore, he cold-bloodedly pushed him off the roof of the house. Now, the fat man was doomed. Terrible torment and a slow death awaited him. Taking advantage of the moment, he tried to get to the neighboring house. The mutants began to tear his body into small pieces. In all this time, he remained alive but could not do anything. Jai watched how the mutants reacted to the food and tried to move very quickly and quietly. There was a lot of different equipment on him, so it was difficult for him. But still, having made a huge amount of effort, he managed to overcome a long distance and end up on the same house. All the time, a woman was watching him with her daughter. She did not believe that he would be able to defeat a huge crowd of people alone, and the worst thing was that his family was waiting for him at home. The girl believed that the main character would survive and win. Tears appeared in the woman's eyes because she also wanted this. Now that he had filled up on the neighboring house, he was ready to enter the room. It was the place where his parents had been taken. Despite the fact that he was very scared, there was no going back. He gathered himself and with all his might jumped into the room. But surprisingly, it was very quiet there. When he looked around the entire room, he saw nothing at all. Even when he calmed down, he calmly and quietly began to move on. Instead, there was a huge amount of blood in the room. Its trail stretched to some kind of open door, and he was going to move along it, trying to find his own family. On his way, he saw a huge number of corpses and human bodies that were scattered throughout the house. Many of them died of hunger or other diseases that developed in a closed room. He understood that he needed to be as careful as possible and not attract anyone. First of all, he wanted to know in which direction he needed to move and where to look for his enemies. So he began to listen. Now he had an understanding of which direction the screams of people were coming from, and he went in search of them. He had to move through the bloody trail that stretched through the entire house. Trying not to attract attention and not to make noise, Jai carefully started climbing the stairs. He saw a lot of bloodstains on the walls and floor. Despite the fact that he was in a house with many enemies, he was not afraid, and for the sake of saving his own family, he stopped. Suddenly, he saw a light in one of the rooms opposite him. Looking in there, he saw a man sitting with his back to him and did not see the main character. He managed to overhear his conversation. That evening, there was to be a feast in the main house, lots of alcohol and food. They discussed the details of their operation and the war they had managed to win. Because they had won, they started drinking and forgot that they were on guard duty. This was a good chance for the main character, and he took advantage of it. When the men lost their vigilance, he attacked them and started killing them one by one. In a panic, they tried to fight him off, but nothing worked. They were all dead. He didn't give anyone a chance to escape and was ruthless. Suddenly, the man heard a strange sound and saw a glass of blood on the shelf. Very soon, he realized that there were still people alive inside. The sound came from the closet where the criminal could be hiding. Therefore, he wanted to force the enemy to come out of it, keeping him at gunpoint. The criminal was a child and did not want to suffer, so he asked to just kill him. But G was in no hurry. He wanted to find out where his parents were and whether they were even alive. There was a bridge on the roof of the building that connected this house with the main building. He did not believe the boy, so he wanted to kill him. However, he asked how old he really was. As it turned out, he was only 14 years old. And this made the man stop. He could not so easily take the life of a child, even though he was his enemy. Jai did not kill him. Instead, he tied the boy tightly. He also covered his mouth so that he would not start screaming and calling for help. Jai left the little one in the same room and went to save his parents. Now he needed to get to the main building that connected these houses. To do this, he needed to go out onto the roof again. There were a lot of enemies there, so he had to do everything very quickly and carefully. But when he got there, he didn't see anyone. Now he tried to find the very bridge the boy had spoken of. As it turned out, it was very close, so the man noticed him right away. But when he was about to go to the next house, he stopped because he heard a strange sound behind him. The man turned sharply to make sure that he was not in danger. However, he saw a man behind him. He was scared and crying. The unknown wanted to be spared and was scared. Jai was going to shoot him to end his suffering. However, the unknown stopped him. He had children, and he wanted them to stay alive. But when he looked into the face of the main character, he changed to recognize him. Jai did not understand anything, who this man really was. Suddenly, he took out a weapon and tried to wound the main character. But he did not succeed because G was ready for this and expected that the enemy would try to deceive him. He shot him right in the face and took his life in cold blood. After that, his dead body flew down, where the mutants would start to tear him apart. Jai just calmly watched what was happening. When the danger passed, he began to move along the bridge, and he heard his enemy screaming, who even after being shot in the face remained alive, and now his body was being torn to pieces. He calmly moved on. However, he noticed that there were a lot of mutants on the street. The monsters were hungry, and very quickly ate the bodies of all the people who were below. Now he managed to get to the neighboring house, just G was inside. In front of him, he saw two people. There was music playing and everyone was drinking. Therefore, they simply did not pay attention to him, and Jai passed by them, not drawing attention to himself. This time he was lucky, but he had to be very careful and try to behave inconspicuously. Inside, there was a real celebration. Heavy music was playing, and everyone was dancing and having fun. They were the winners in the war, so they wanted to celebrate. Also, in the middle of the hall sat the chief, surrounded by food and women. He was the main organizer of this celebration. Also, inside, there were many prisoners who were going to be tortured in front of everyone. In order to stay alive and become members of their clan, the poor people had to eat pieces of human flesh. The crowd liked it, so they started screaming. Some tried to do it, but they failed. Then, they were faced with a cruel punishment. They were simply killed. People simply had no choice. They were forced to do what they were told. Otherwise, they would simply be killed, and their bodies would be thrown to the monsters. Suddenly, the same boy appeared in the crowd. He managed to untie himself and get inside the house. But when he tried to tell the leader about what happened, he didn't believe him because he thought that the kid was just trying to ruin everyone's holiday. But it was too late because the main character was inside the house. He opened fire with his own weapon. Now, all the people inside realized that the war was not over, but they didn't know who the main character was and how he managed to get inside the house. The leader wanted to eat him alive because the unknown had caused him great damage and many of his people were dead. Now, the main character was going to do everything possible to continue killing enemies. And in order to remain unnoticed, he turned off the light and the whole room was in darkness. Those who had a flashlight were lucky because they could see the main character. Now they tried to block the stairs to prevent the man from getting inside their room and shooting them all. Suddenly, the main character disappeared. Instead, he threw an explosive mixture at the enemies. Now everything was in flames and people began to burn alive. The chief urgently ordered everyone to put out the fire because they simply had no way to leave the room. A lot of people got burns trying to put out the fire, and those who dared to run away, the main character was waiting and simply shot. He sat in the darkness and waited for people to come to him. The flames were able to hold them back. He had time to try to find all the prisoners. The man was lucky because at the end of the corridor he saw a light and his parents were sitting in a cage. Emotions overwhelmed him. But when he saw what was done to all the prisoners, his heart almost stopped. He urgently needed to do something because he risked simply not having time to save them. Meanwhile, the enemies managed to put out the flames and were already trying to find him. G managed to hide behind the stairs and held his breath so that they would not hear him. Despite the danger, he started moving. He tried to go down a few floors below, but there he saw mutants who managed to break inside. There were so many of them that G had to run away. The only way to escape was up the mountain, so he started running straight there. But when he broke away from them, he was able to block the door. Jai didn't believe that such protection could stop them completely, but now he had some time. The man decided to take a risk. For this, he was going to let the monsters inside. He hoped that they wouldn't see him and would just run past. But suddenly, the same boy who told everyone about him appeared in front of him. He wanted to kill him, but there was no time for this, so he just ran on. Very soon, the monsters would burst into the house, destroying everything in their path. The door broke, and the little boy saw a huge number of mutants in front of him. The people who were trapped screamed and called for help, but nothing could save them. Meanwhile, the prisoners were protected because a cage separated them from the monsters. They all pressed against the wall, trying to survive this terrible moment. Now, the main character's path to his boutiques was blocked. In order to get to the other part of the house, he had to go outside. He moved very carefully, trying to keep his balance. However, he saw in the window the same boy who miraculously managed to break away from the zombies and close himself in one of the rooms. But now, it became a trap for him, because in a little while the monsters would also break down his door. He tried to shout to the main character and asked to be saved. But the man did not have time for this. He needed to move on. Despite the fact that the monsters were already nearby, he decided to save him, because the boy was just a child. Therefore, he turned around and tried to break the net. He unbent it with his own hands so that the boy could get out, but warned him never to come into his sight again. The child's life was saved, and therefore, he continued to move on. Above him, he saw a window and realized that it was the same room where his poor parents were. He managed to get to them, and looking inside, he saw them. It was really them. They couldn't believe their eyes because they didn't even know if their son was alive. But now, he was saving them, trying to do everything to unbend the heavy metal. Together with them, he managed to save all the other prisoners, and now they were moving along a narrow passage. Any step could be their last, so everyone tried to move slowly and carefully. Now the main character began to climb up. He needed to get to the bridge that connected this house with another. But when he climbed, he saw that his enemies had managed to block the stairs and were still alive. They blocked the passage with all the objects they could get their hands on, and the people who remained there were doomed. They didn't let anyone in. Jai finally managed to get to the bridge, but when he was about to climb the mountain, he saw that there were a lot of enemies on him. They all tried to escape because this was the only way to salvation, but suddenly they noticed Jie and stopped. Many people, including the leader, remained inside. However, their defenses would soon be broken, so they had to retreat. They all quickly surfaced. However, the bridge was broken. The enemies were in mortal danger, but they saw Ji. He was moving along the ropes, trying to get to the other side. The hero knew he had been spotted. Now Jai realized that he was in real danger. He and his parents froze in anticipation of something terrible, and exactly what they feared most happened. The enemies had weapons, because the enemy shot straight at the man. A bloodstain appeared on his face. In addition, he felt such intense pain that he could barely hold on to the rope. Meanwhile, his wife could not calm down. In her arms was his daughter, who was constantly crying, waiting for her father to return. She heard shots and voices many blocks from her house, but she knew that something terrible had happened. She remembered how long before that she and her husband had watched a zombie movie. At that time, it seemed very terrible to her, and she simply could not watch it calmly. At that time, she could not even think that these events could become a reality for them. Now she was in the place of the hero of the movie, who was eagerly awaiting the return of her hero husband, who had risked his own life. Back then, they didn't think about how valuable the food they had was. And the zombies seemed so imaginary, and in reality, no one could believe that they existed. For some reason, the woman was not at ease, even though it was a movie. For a second, she imagined that all the events could actually happen to them. But even if that happened, the man promised to protect her at all costs. It seemed that he didn't believe that such a thing was possible. However, now that he was not around, she remembered his words and wanted to see him at least once. Due to the injury, the man started bleeding and almost fell off the rope. However, he made a lot of effort and endured great pain in order to hold on. After all, if he fell, then certain death would await him below. His father tried to shout to him, but Ji did not respond. Then, in order to save him, he climbed up to him and wanted to stop him from falling. Nevertheless, he managed to save his son. All the people helped him get to the neighboring house. The enemy continued to fire at them, but he ran out of ammunition. However, he had another weapon. It was a rope with which he could grab people and try to push them out of the house. A hook was tied to the end of it, so he could use it to reach the neighboring house. Other people had the same equipment, so now they were going to reach their house. Meanwhile, Ji began to provide assistance and tried to stop the heavy bleeding. But suddenly, they noticed that the enemy began to climb over to their side. Even the destroyed bridge did not stop them. The chief began to threaten them. Especially, he wanted to kill the main character, who had spoiled his holiday and doomed many of his people to death. However, this time, Ji did not have the strength to fight. Together with the other people, they began to retreat. Now the enemies were trying to reach their house and were doing everything possible to do so. In order to stop the attackers, people began to build fortifications. But to make their defense much more effective, they decided to set it on fire. They had very few items, so they used absolutely everything they could find to defend themselves. The enemies, who began to approach them, realized that the people had set the fire in order to stop them. But even because of this, they were not going to stop, because they could not believe that the people were really ready for such a desperate step and set a fire in the middle of the house. Therefore, they continued to move forward. The flames stopped them and the enemies moved on, receiving serious injuries and burns. At this moment, the main character and his greatest enemy met their eyes. The criminal managed to bend over the rich, suddenly a strong blow that Ji did not expect at all. The strong criminal began to kill the people who tried to stop him. A real massacre began and many men from both sides died. In the midst of the battle, he grabbed the main character and held him by the neck. Now that he had prepared to strike and was ready to kill him, however, his father appeared out of nowhere. He managed to stop the attacker and seriously injure him, in a row his own son's life. However, the enemy managed to dodge and remain unharmed. After that, he struck back directly in the man's stomach. But the man did not stop and continued to fight him. He managed to dodge many of his attacks, remaining unharmed. Then, the man realized that the man was very strong and skilled despite his age. And if he were younger, he would have definitely been able to kill him already. However, now he was not in such good shape as before. Because of this, the enemy managed to injure him. He started beating the old man, right in front of his son. Jai could calmly watch as his loved one was beaten in front of him. He wanted to stop it, however. He understood that he did not have much strength for this. Besides, he was wounded. Jai gathered his strength, and when the moment to attack came, he did it. Blow after blow, he began to beat the strong enemy. However, his allies stopped him. People united in order to stop the enemies and prevent them from passing further. For the first time, the mask flew off the enemy's face, and everyone saw his terrible face. The enemy promised that all his people would die. Suddenly, a strong explosion sounded behind him. The blast wave threw his body away, and the flash of flames was visible for many blocks from there. This was seen by a woman who had been constantly watching what was happening. The smoke and flames scared her very much. She could not believe that Ji had died. However, in reality, he was alive. The people were also alive, but many of them were seriously injured. At the same time, the main enemy was also alive. He was the only one who managed to survive, but he had serious wounds. In addition, he lost his fingers and could not get up. He had no leg, and very soon he risked dying from blood loss. Others began to climb out of the rubble, who also managed to survive. Now they were going to continue attacking people. But despite the order of the main one, none of them dared to do this. Despite the fact that he started screaming, they were not going to move further and attack the group of people. Suddenly, a sharp knife hit him right in the face. His own people began to kill him because they did not want to just go to certain death. The main character watched all this. They decided to leave them and wanted to leave the building before the flames completely engulfed it. Suddenly, the woman noticed the main character and was very happy when she realized that he had survived. Her daughter was also very happy when she saw that Ji had survived. Now, the woman thought about how she could show the man the direction in which he needed to move. Therefore, she ordered her daughter to bring a flashlight. In the dark, he was very visible. Therefore, Jai noticed him without any problems and knew in which direction he needed to move. That was where his salvation was, because the woman had enough food and water, which would last for a while for all of them. People began to move. They did it along the power lines. The main character, who was walking behind, cut the wires behind him so that the enemies could not catch up with them. Now they were safe because the enemies had no chance to catch up with them. After a while, they got inside their house. Suddenly, everyone started applauding him. Jai became their savior and saved many others besides his own parents. They were all proud of him and thanked him for the gift of life and salvation. Many of them had lost their own families and clans. However, now, they needed to come together in order to continue to survive. People had to support each other. In addition, the woman was ready to share all her own food and water supplies and allowed them to live in this house. She gave them hope for a new life, so they wanted him to become the main one. After the people regained their strength, they needed to leave their own house. He, along with his comrades, went outside to make a dangerous journey. However, moving on the surface was very dangerous because there were many mutants on the streets. Therefore, they chose the sewers, which remained the safest place. Others watched them and hoped that everything would work out for them. His father could not go with him because of his injuries, but he knew that his son was a hero. The men continued to move through a narrow tunnel. On their way, there was a lake that they had to cross. In order not to waste all their strength, they decided to use the inflatable rings that were in the house. The men managed to do this and they reached the land, but immediately met the mutants. A fight began. They tried to kill the mutants that were approaching them. In order to continue moving, they had to get to the roof of the house. The men acted very well, so they tried to do it as quickly as possible. They had no chance of making a mistake because they were being chased by a lot of zombies all the time. At the cost of joint efforts, they ended up on the roof where the mutants could not reach them. And in order for them not to be able to reach them, they had to take away the ladder. Now, the men moved on, helping each other. Gradually, they approached their goal. Now, they were very close to the main character's house. Only a few blocks remained to be walked. Gio knew that his family was waiting for him, and he believed that everything was fine with them and they were alive. Ahead, the most difficult stage of the journey remained, because the distance to the neighboring house was very great, and the street that separated them was too wide and dangerous. Before moving on, they decided to rest and gain strength. The zombies that were on the street were very strong and fast. Also, one of the men knew that even they could not do without water and some kind of food. With his own eyes, he saw how the dead drank water from the ditch, ate cats, dogs, and other corpses. Moreover, they attacked each other. In addition, it was found out that the zombies could not swim and were afraid of fire. The virus attacked the human brain, and the person who was infected with it lost control over emotions and could not control himself. Also, people lost some of their physical sensations. The feeling of pain and fatigue became dull, and in fact, they felt almost nothing. It was also observed that the zombies had epileptic seizures, which occurred because the virus destroyed brain cells. Perhaps they became aggressive precisely when they saw people, and then the coordination of their movements became better. In addition, their hearts beat and they were alive because blood flowed from their bodies. The corpses of the dead did not rot and were not infected with infections. This meant that the virus could spread not only through a bite or the blood of an infected person. However, no one knew this. It was likely that there were other ways to get infected with the virus. The places in the city were very familiar to the men. They had played on one of the playgrounds when they were children. Suddenly, they remembered that there was a feed factory next to them. This meant that there was a lot of food. They were so busy that they didn't notice a group of people behind them. They were factory workers who didn't want to share their food, so they were advised to leave. At first, Jai thought that these people were cannibals. But when he looked closely into their leader's eyes, he realized that this was not the case. He tried to explain that they were not looking for shelter, but simply stopped on their territory to rest. The old man told them about the road that was below. He agreed to help them. The men didn't trust him, but they had no other choice. They decided to go with him because they had nothing to lose. Ji explained that he wanted to save his own family, which he left in the apartment. And the men who went with him were his friends, so they agreed to help. In addition, the main character noticed that many doors were locked. There were many mutants left inside the closed rooms, and the old man tried to conduct experiments on the infected. He wanted to try to understand the nature of the disease and find a cure. Now they came to the same place and began to go down. The men found themselves inside a narrow underground tunnel. For added security, there were metal bars and guards inside. Here, the old man was going to the people, and then when they were supposed to move on their own, he promised that at any moment they could return and use their passage. When the men were on the surface, they pulled the rope and began to move in the direction of Ji's house. They were almost there and had only a little longer to go. Jai could almost see his house, and now he had the feeling that he had been away from home for a whole year. Therefore, he wanted to see his family as soon as possible. However, the cage on the roof was open, which meant that there could be many mutants inside. Suddenly, they saw the first of them. The zombie immediately rushed at the men. There were so many mutants that people had to run away in order to save themselves. The chase continued, and they urgently needed to find a safe place for themselves. Suddenly, they found themselves on the edge of the house, surrounded by mutants. It seemed that there was no chance of salvation, and in a panic, Ji slipped. The man began to fall down. However, he was very lucky. Ji was able to catch his foot on the metal grate, so he stayed alive. Now, they were trapped because they could not return to the roof of the house where the mutants were waiting for them. The only way to escape was to break the bars and get inside through someone's apartment. But it wasn't so easy to do because there were a lot of mutants inside. One of them almost bit the man's hand, but he managed to push him away. Other monsters started to descend towards them. It was necessary to escape and do it as quickly as possible. Therefore, the men started to descend lower while the zombies were chasing them. There were so many of them that the men took a desperate step. In order to escape, they wanted to get to the neighboring house. Fortunately, they managed to do it at the last moment. A few more seconds and they would have died. I started screaming. He hoped that Feng Yun would hear him. She heard a familiar voice and couldn't believe that it was her savior. Feng Yun went out onto the balcony and saw her husband not far from her. Tears appeared on her face. He was alive. Emotions overwhelmed both of them, so he also burst into tears. Finally, for the first time in a long time of separation, he managed to see his own family. He tried to calm his wife. After all, he was able to return safe and sound, as he had promised. His daughter missed him very much and was happy when she finally could see him. She was also very happy when she saw his childhood friends next to him. The men intended to take his family and transfer them to a safe place where everyone who managed to survive would live. In addition, his friends were ready to take risks for him because the main character was their savior. However, Ji remained very modest. Suddenly, they saw zombies. The mutants were able to get to them, and now all people were in real danger. Jai quickly led his family inside the house, and he, along with the others, remained on the balcony and began to fight back. Strike! The first monster was destroyed. Another one came after him, also very strong. The man smashed his face with a sharp knife. This was not enough. They could not cope with the large number of mutants. The zombies were able to jump over their house and started to get inside. Now there were a lot of them. At this rate, they will not last, because the grate will not withstand such pressure. The only way to escape is to get out of the apartment through the back window. Meanwhile, the grate began to break and some zombies could get inside. Ji tried to stop them, however. All his efforts were in vain. The grate was broken, and now the zombies could get inside. However, his family had already started to descend from the window, so he needed to hold out for a while and try to stop the mutants. Only in this way could his family escape. For him, it was most important to save them. Jai could no longer hold them back. The bars were broken, so he started to run away. At the last moment, he managed to jump out the window and escape. Now he was on the ground, next to his family. The people continued to run and started to descend. After that, they reached a neighboring house to which a rope was stretched. The people did not know what would await them inside, however, they could no longer stay outside. Due to fear and stress, his care began to cry. In order to calm her down, the man had to give her the last supplies of food that they had with them. The man tried to explain that the mutants were bad and could eat them, so she needed to be with him and do everything as he said. Now that the child had calmed down, they could move on. Ahead was the tunnel they had come through. Finally, they breathed a sigh of relief because it seemed they were in a safe place. However, the workers who were there were behaving very strangely. It seemed that they were just sleeping because they did not react to people at all. Jai touched him because he wanted them to open the door. But very quickly he realized that all the workers were infected and turned into mutants. They began to attack people. He was very lucky because at the last moment the man managed to push the zombie away from him. A fight broke out and the men tried to kill all the infected. Feng Yun was defenseless. She had no weapons. She watched as the men, risking their own lives, tried to kill the monster with their own hands. At any cost, they wanted to protect her and the child and not let them die from the zombie bite. The fight was difficult because there were so many mutants. Feng Yun closed her daughter's eyes so that she wouldn't see the horror that was happening in the tunnel. When it was all over, the men wanted to take a breath. Now they were trapped. They didn't know if other people had been infected and what would await them on the surface. However, they had no other way. They simply couldn't turn back. The only way was the way forward, and they had to go back at any cost. The light in the tunnel suddenly disappeared, so people had to move almost blindly. The scary atmosphere became even more tense. He ordered one of his comrades to stay with his family. He, along with the others, were going to go ahead to scout. It was necessary to check if the tunnel was really safe. They started moving, but on their way they saw a lot of blood. All the walls of the tunnel and the floor were covered in blood, which meant that a fight had taken place here. In addition, they heard strange sounds. It was the growl of a zombie, which could not be confused with anything else. Going further, they saw a pile of dead people tearing apart human bodies. What they feared most had happened. Now, the group of people who had helped them were dead, and without them, they would not be able to get out of the tunnel and return. A battle began, where it was only them against a huge number of mutants. However, they did not retreat, but continued to stand and fight with them. For some time, they managed to fight back, but new zombies constantly came running. Still, the first group of mutants was destroyed. Ji raised his own flashlight. Now, they could continue moving forward. The men were covered in blood, scared and hungry, but they did not even intend to turn back. Ahead, they saw an exit. There was a ladder they could climb and get inside the house. The main character went first. Inside the room, he saw the bodies of other people. Behind him, his friend appeared. When they examined the bodies, it became clear what had really happened. These people were victims of mutants, and in addition, there were arrows in their bodies. When he was convinced that the room was really safe, he brought the others with him. The door in the room was closed on the other side, and this gave them hope that people could be alive. Jai tried to break it down, and after a while, he managed to do it. Suddenly, the sound of a shot. Jai covered his wife and daughter with his own body and ordered everyone to lie down on the ground. The shooting did not stop, and there were a lot of arrows on the walls. One of them got stuck in his briefcase. The man started screaming. He hoped that people would believe him and stop. A voice was heard from the other side, and after a while, someone looked in through the small window in the room. Suddenly, the door opened. Armed men appeared inside, ready to immediately shoot the entire group of the main character. After them, the chief entered, who was able to recognize Jie. But even after his appearance, the soldiers did not lower their weapons. In fact, it was a test to see if the people were infected. Only after that could they go inside. The first symptoms were supposed to appear in half an hour, so they just had to wait. The man also learned that the people had managed to kill all the zombies that were in the tunnel. With this act, they surpassed all his expectations, and then he realized that they were strong and brave warriors. As a sign of gratitude, he was going to treat them to food and drinks, so he invited the people to walk with him. However, Jai did not believe his words. He wanted them to just let go and refused food and any gifts. The old man was silent. He looked intently into the protagonist's face. And when his soldier started threatening people, he simply shut him up. It seemed that the old man understood that Ji was afraid and did not trust him. Nevertheless, he forced the people to go with him, and very soon, they were brought food and drinks. At any moment, he could simply give the order to kill them all, so the people simply had no choice. However, none of them ate anything except the guy in the blue suit. He was so hungry that he completely forgot about caution. Moreover, he was very surprised when no one except him even touched the food. Nowadays, people risked their lives for such food, so at this time, rice rolls became a real delicacy. However, the man did not take his words seriously, because he was convinced that it was just a move by the main character to gain respect for himself. However, the old man took his words as a threat and became very angry about it. They started arguing, so in order to calm them down, the main character intervened in the conversation. He was also curious why they were not being let go, and it only meant that they were needed. In fact, the old man wanted to ask them for a favor, Besides, he wanted to make a deal with them. Suddenly, everyone looked at him. As it turned out, the old man had lost touch with his own son, who lived in another district. That is why he wanted people to go looking for him. However, everyone knew that there were no people left in the area, because all the houses were occupied by mutants. Moreover, the man sent several units to rescue him, and none of them ever returned. Jai understood that his son was dead, because a lot of time had passed since the day they introduced quarantine. But it didn't bother him at all, because he would never change his own decision or change his mind. Jun tried to explain that they were not experienced fighters, and besides, there were too few of them for such a journey. But the main character stopped him. He had conditions, and if the old man agreed, then he would go in search of his son. The old man became curious and decided to listen to him. For the return of his son, Ji wanted to receive 1,000 kilograms of grain. But when the man heard his words, he fell silent. Still, he agreed. But there was another condition that the man was going to voice. Jai wanted his wife and daughter to be taken to a safe place, to his parents. After that, he would calm down. But after his words, the head just laughed. He dropped a glass of water on the ground. They broke, and that was a sign. After that, people began to be tied up and tried to be taken prisoner. Hai had no choice but to try to resist. He started fighting and managed to injure one of the attackers. After that, another blow. Even several strong workers could not calm him down. However, when the gun was pointed at his wife, he stopped. Jai understood that she would be shot immediately, so he simply had no other choice. His daughter was crying, but Ji could do nothing to stop this horror. He simply gave up and waited for the enemies to tie him up. The cunning old man mocked them and was happy that the people were helpless. The old man thought that Ji wanted to trick him and was actually just looking for a way to escape. When he laughed, the main character's eyes filled with blood. His wife and daughter remained in the camp while they were sent on a mission at gunpoint. He really didn't want to part with her again. Feng Yun was crying. She was afraid again for her husband's life. Kair wanted to comfort her. She believed that her father was a superhero and could save them again. The old man tried to explain that he was not evil. He wanted to help them, but most of all, he wanted to try to find his own son. After these words, the woman could not stand it. She did not want to say this before, but now she could not help herself. She started to shout at him because he had done a very mean thing. The old man had grabbed them at the very moment when they needed help. But the soldiers covered her mouth so that she would not shout anymore and call the old man names. The man was convinced that he was doing the right thing. In his opinion, any person should first of all think only of himself, just as he thought of his own son. Suddenly, he turned to the man and woman who were standing next to him. He ordered his prisoners to be lowered down and handled as carefully as possible. They could not be tortured, and he ordered them to be fed well and given plenty of drinking water. Deep in his heart, he hoped that the men would be able to bring his son back. Meanwhile, the men continued to make their way through the streets of the city, which were swarming with zombies. They had to jump from house to house because walking along the streets was very dangerous because they were simply swarming with mutants. Their journey was very dangerous, so they helped and watched each other. One of them had an idea. He wanted to try to take the old man's daughter prisoner and try to free the main character's family. However, Ji was convinced that it would not work so easily because his daughter was not as important to him as his own son. Suddenly, she appeared right behind them. She went in search of her own brother. She managed to overhear the men's conversation, and she knew that in fact her father loved his own son more than her. The men realized that this was a good chance. Right now I could kill them all and then strike back. However, the woman was convinced that it would not work because her father had very good security and many shampoos in different parts of the city. And right now they could observe secret agents who were hiding in neighboring houses or on the streets of the city. So if they dare to take such a desperate step and try to follow the old man, he will definitely be able to stop it. In fact, she didn't love him because he didn't appreciate her and wasn't proud of her and his cool son. She became his problem right after she was born. Her relationship with her father was very difficult, but she was willing to risk her own life for him. But in reality, she was doing it for her own brother, whom she loved very much despite the fact that he was his favorite. Instead of wasting time, it was better to think about the next plan. She took out a map where there was a green dot, which was a place where they could stop because it was very safe there. It became clear that they had to cover a long distance, so it was a very dangerous operation. There were a lot of big houses in that area. The streets were wide. Also, a public park was opened, where there would most likely be a lot of mutants. Another area was marked on the map, which had a lot of tall houses. Also, there was the center of the old city. The scariest place they could find themselves, there was a large square that was filled with mutants. Also, there was a yellow line on the map, which was the metro route. However, the woman said that it was not completed and the construction had not been completed in time. In any case, they needed to pass by the city center. Therefore, they needed to try to build a plan. There was very little time left, so they kept moving. I didn't watch the huge number of people who managed to survive who were hiding in their own homes without food and water, but they couldn't help any of them. Every time I had to pass by people who were dying. One of the women, who hadn't left her apartment for several months, asked for some food and water. The girl stopped. She felt sorry for the old woman, so she gave her some food supplies. The old woman was very happy. However, the main character stopped her. He knew that the old woman was a cannibal, so there was no need to waste time on her. At that very moment, she took out a knife. She tried to attack the girl with it. At the last moment, she managed to jump back and avoid the attack. In fact, it was a trap that many people fell into. Now the real danger threatens them, because armed people began to attack them. One of the guards who was walking with them was wounded. She managed to wound one of the attackers, but the fight was not over yet. The door to the apartment opened and armed men started running from there, straight at them. There were a lot of them, and they were moving straight at the main characters. Also, an armed group of people started running from the other side. Now they were surrounded and had serious problems. She had no other choice, so she tried to blackmail and promised to blow up the building with her. This made the men stop, because none of them wanted to die. Jai held one of them at gunpoint, but he was afraid that the woman could really blow up the house, so he didn't want to take any chances and stopped. Suddenly, a strange scream came from the middle of the house. The same woman who had started it all came out. The old woman was very weak, but when all the soldiers saw her, they were scared. It seemed that they were all afraid, because she was the leader. Just at that moment, a woman from her group of people lost her husband and could not bear it anymore. She was very sorry, so she decided to let him try a rice ball, at least before he died. In fact, this food was very delicious, and he thanked her for this gift. But now he died. People started crying because he was a very good soldier. The old woman also cried a lot and started to regret trying to attack those armed men. But when the others smelled the rice ball, they realized that it was very delicious. He remembered the day when she first tasted human flesh. Right then, the old woman gathered them all in her own kitchen and decided to feed them. None of the people expected to see a soup that had so much meat in it. Moreover, it was very delicious. But many people wondered where she could get so much meat and cook so much food. Furthermore, none of them had seen any animals or other products. This question haunted them. Where had they been able to find the meat? But she did not answer. The woman simply stood up and left the table, but everyone saw her bandaged and cut leg. At that moment, everything became clear. What had really happened to her leg? People wanted to hear an explanation from her. But, in reality, she had cut off a piece of her own leg just so they could eat. None of them could understand why she had done it, and people wanted to thank her for the kindness she had done for them. They cried, but the woman assured them that she was fine. She had done it because she was old and could die at any moment. All the people were very young, and she hoped that this would benefit him. The boy who cried was her favorite, and she remembered that he was a very good boy in his childhood. Now the boy who was her favorite died. Now his dead body could become food, which the other people had to share among themselves. When they had food, the old woman let them go because she didn't want other people to die too. Many of the soldiers couldn't understand her behavior and didn't know why they just let the people go. But the woman was convinced that they weren't murderers and were doing everything for their own survival. Now in front of the group of people was an area with large and tall buildings. The streets were indeed very wide as they saw on the map, so there were a lot of dead people there. Now, the main character needed to collect all the necessary equipment. They wanted to move to the neighboring house, but they were separated by a wide street. He prepared very well, so he had a special machine that he wanted to throw a rope to another house. It was a gun that he managed to collect from all the objects that were under the rocks. He shot, but the first time he didn't succeed because the range of the shot was too short. Jai tried again, but this time nothing. Every time he didn't succeed and had to do everything from the beginning. People had already lost hope of overcoming the wide street and wanted to turn back. However, they had another plan, because through binoculars they saw a tree that was very tall and grew exactly where the gun could reach. The rope they had might have been enough. But in order to get to the tree, it was necessary to go down to the square. Despite the danger, Jai began to go down. When he was on the ground, all the mutants that were around him started to run. The main character started to run because there were too many monsters and he would not be able to cope with them all. People who were on the roof began to protect him and tried to shoot the mutants who were chasing him. They threw Molotov cocktails at them and burned them. Also, imitated shooting from bows and learning to aim accurately. This allowed the main character to gain an advantage, and he gradually approached his goal. Now he was very close to the red car and the tree. Jai accelerated and jumped onto the car. Then, he grabbed a branch of the tree and tried to climb it. When he was on the tree, he tried to pull the rope that people were holding onto at the other end. From the tree, he managed to reach the neighboring house, which is what he was trying to do. Nevertheless, he succeeded, and very quickly he was on the neighboring house. Now he needed to pull the rope so that other people could reach him and continue their journey. He was so preoccupied that he didn't notice a mutant appearing behind him and starting to chase him. In order to prevent him from biting himself, the man threw the book over his head and threw himself. People couldn't help him because the distance was too great and their arrows simply didn't reach him. So now he found himself alone against a strong mutant who wanted to eat him. The giant monster was right in front of him. The main character prepared to fight him. But the hero realized that the mutant was on the glass, so he could cheat. And he did it. And in order not to risk his own life, he simply destroyed the glass under him. However, the mutant managed to grab the edge of the metal support with his own paw. The man simply chopped off his fingers. Now, it seemed, the danger had passed because the mutant was on the ground. The height was not very great, so the monster was on the ground and remained alive. The zombie did not want to give up so easily, so he got to his feet and tried to tackle him again. He tried to jump up and grab the metal support again to try to reach the man. From the first time, he failed and people watched as the zombies tried to reach him. The hand of this guy there was very strong and he seemed to speak. Realizing that sooner or later I would be able to reach him, the main character had to run away. He tried to climb higher. The man did it as quickly as possible in order to break away from the pursuit. However, the zombie was smart and tried to climb the metal support again. To do this, he climbed the same tree, and from it, he could successfully reach the ledge on the house. The monster was moving very quickly, and soon I would be able to catch up with the man. In order to stop him, people tried to hit him with arrows. But it was very dangerous because at the same time they could advise the main character. Still, the zombie managed to catch up with him and grab the man by the leg. At that moment, he thought that this was his end because he definitely would not be able to cope with such a strong mutant. He was just very lucky because the woman actually saved his life. She hit him right in the arm with her own arrow, which stopped him. This really angered the monster. He saw him being shot at from a neighboring house. At that moment, they aimed at him again. Suddenly, a shot. The arrow hit him right in the back, and hit him right in the back. Meanwhile, the main character managed to get to the roof of the house. He breathed a sigh of relief because he managed to stay alive and complete a dangerous task. Suddenly, he saw that despite the huge number of arrows, Monster remained alive and would continue to pursue him all the time. But the man was not confused. He was ready for this. He aimed and shot him right in the forehead. Despite the fact that the poster was very deadly and the arrow hit him right in the eye, the mutant remained alive. He simply took it out of his own skull and wanted to tear the main character into small pieces. Suddenly, a new shot. This arrow went right through. But even that didn't stop him, and he also continued to stay alive. The main character had no other choice, so he tried to chop it with his own axe. Then when he wanted to hit it, the zombie caught his hand and stopped the blow. Now when they started to fall to the ground, but he managed to push the monster away from him. He got back on his feet and tried to attack the main character. G realized that defeating him was not so easy, so he chose a different tactic. To do this, he moved very quickly and did not let the zombies surround him. Because of this, he managed to tie up the monster. But that wasn't the end. In order to restrain the strong mutant, much more rope was needed, so he continued to tie him up. Finally, he managed to tie him up tightly, and he hoped that it might work. The others noticed that the main thing in the game was to defeat the strong mutant. And while the creatures couldn't get out, they had to push the rope as quickly as possible to get to him. Despite the fact that there were a lot of mutants below and the rope was very low above them, they had to move forward. One by one, people started to do it. After a while, they all ended up on the neighboring house. Now, they could all carefully examine the immortal monster that was trying to attack the main character. You wanted to kill him. This mutant was really very dangerous and strong. Besides, he was intelligent. If all zombies became like this, people would die without a single chance of salvation. However, one could not lose hope in such difficult situations, and one had to seek salvation at any cost. The guard, who was a veterinarian in the past, wanted to check the monster's internal organs. He managed to find the location of his heart and wanted to check if he would die after that. Well, with all his strength, he stabbed him with a knife right in the heart. The man realized that it was in place because blood began to flow from the heart and wound. Then, he continued to strike at other internal organs, trying to find its weak spot. Everyone watched what was happening. But it was obvious that the monster was much stronger than ordinary zombies, and even with internal organ damage, it did not die. In order to kill it, it was necessary to cut off its head or injure its brain. They did not have much time left, so they had to keep moving. As before, they tried not to go down to the streets and climbed from house to house with the help of a rope. In front of them, there was a large area, so they had to move along a pedestrian bridge. Thus, they also managed to overcome this difficult test. Next, they found themselves on a tall building, which they had to pass through because they couldn't reach its roof. In order to get inside, they had to unbend the protective grills, which we will use to cover almost all the windows. When everything was ready, the people were inside. They moved very carefully around the house, checking every room. It would get dark very soon, so they needed to find a safe place for themselves. This place could be their apartment, so they lit a fire and were going to spend the night there. The conversation turned to the old man and the fact that he had a lot of food and no one had ever robbed him. This information was not secret, so the girl agreed to tell her husband everything. After the epidemic began, her father united all the people in the house and did everything possible to make them work together. They were constantly engaged in buying underground tunnels and sometimes fought with other neighboring houses, which had the same united groups of people. They did not fight for the factory, which had huge reserves of metals and other food, and all the wealth belonged to her father. He managed to create a special food group, which included people who had families. They lived in a warehouse that was isolated from the outside world. In addition, her father had planted explosives in the warehouse and was ready to blow it up at any moment. He had a lot of power and paid all the people with food for their work, and those who did not work did not receive anything. Everyone at the factory knew very well about his methods of government, and everyone agreed with it. So even small children worked. There was no guarantee that somewhere in the world there was a person exactly like her father. So people always remained suspicious and did not want to betray him. Everyone listened to her story very carefully and tried to understand who her father really was. While people were talking, it became very dark on the street. They all slept in turns, and there were always a few people left on duty. Now, it was the turn of the security guard who worked in the warehouse. He carefully watched the woman sleep. Gradually, when he began to approach her while she was sleeping, he wanted to grab her and strangle her. But in reality, she heard him and followed his every step, was not ready for this, and hid the knife. At the last moment, they managed to stop him and put the knife to her neck. In fact, the security guard was very worried about her and secretly loved her. He went on a dangerous journey only so that in the future she would become his wife. But she agreed to marry him only after they could save her brother. But this was not enough for him, and he wanted to at least try to kiss her. Still, she did not agree and pushed him away. The night passed. The turn of people was over. Now, they gathered all the necessary things that remained in the house and continued to move on in search of the lost boy. On their way, there were a huge number of no dances, which they constantly had to fight. Now they managed to go down to the basement, where the abandoned car was. People checked it, and after making sure that it was safe there, they decided to use it. We started loading the car with all our things and tried to seal the windows so that the mutant could not get inside. Now that the car was protected, they could not try to start the engine. That wasn't all. Just in case, the man doused her with gasoline so that in case of something, they could set the car on fire. Now, all the people got inside the car and the main character got behind the wheel. Jai was the only one who had to beat zombies in a car, so all the people trusted him. Now he started the engine and started moving. Very soon, he managed to break the garage gate and find himself right on the street. There were a lot of mutants there, and he started to crush them and was not afraid that the car would not hold up or get stuck. But with every minute, the mutants became more and more numerous. Therefore, he ordered his comrade to set the car on fire. Now they were hiding in the car, which was burning, and the monsters were afraid of fire, so they did not approach them. In order to stop the fire in the cabin, they used water, which they tried to stop the fire, and it spread. But they very quickly realized that in fact not all zombies were afraid of flames. In addition, it was getting very hot in the car, and there was a lot of smoke, so it was becoming very difficult to breathe. The whole car was on fire, even the tires started to burn. People were driving to the park, and now that they were in place, they had to urgently leave the car. But when they got out of it and started running, the car exploded because the fire reached the tank. They were very lucky, because if it had been a few more seconds, they would all have died. On the map, they noticed that there was a huge lake in the park with a lot of boats in it. It seemed to people that this was a very safe place because there were the fewest mutants in the water and they did not go into it. Therefore, each of them took a felt for himself and began to influence from the shore. This was the only place where people could relax and feel safe. On their way, there was a bridge on which there were a lot of mutants. And in order for them not to jump on them, they had to shoot them. In addition, the dead on your street jumped straight into the boat to them. However, people managed to overcome this threat. She remembered how long ago he had rested in this beautiful city with his family. He and his girls really loved this place. There were always a lot of people here, and it was very beautiful. G missed the times when he and his family could just rest and live. They fed the fish from the boat and laughed. He loved his family and wanted to spend a lot of time with them. However, now, he wanted to go back to those beautiful times again. He watched the fish in the lake swimming near their boat. And now, for him, it was food that was needed for survival. People were very happy because they understood that now we could not eat normal food, and fish on the tables for them was a real salvation. But there was no time for this, because soon they needed to get to the shore, on which there were a lot of mutants. First of all, when I tried to clear a passage for myself in order to safely get to land and continue moving. But when they went ashore, they did not even suspect what danger awaited them. At first, everything was very calm and they did not hear anything suspicious. In order to conquer their way, they decided to walk through dense thickets. However, people could not even think that there would be a huge danger waiting for them. Immediately, a huge number of mutants rushed at them. A real bloodbath began, and none of them expected that there would be so many zombies. They began to surround people and attack from all sides. One of them even managed to bite the girl's hand. Now she realized that her path ended there, because immediately incomprehensible things began to happen to her body. At one point, another mutant wanted to bite her hand, but at the last moment, he was shot right in the face, which is why the girl was saved. In order for the infection not to spread throughout the body, it was necessary to take a desperate step. Therefore, she cut off her own hand and tried to stop the bleeding, while other people covered it with their own bodies. But the pain was so strong that she began to lose consciousness. She simply fell to the ground and could not continue fighting, so people had to try to protect her. The guard took her on his shoulder, because they could not just leave her there to die. Besides, there was still hope that she would survive. People had to run. There were so many mutants that they would never be able to cope with them. The main character stopped so that people could get to the nearest building. Now it was his turn. He started running, catching up with them. The monsters continued to chase him. G was in heavy equipment and spent a lot of strength, so we started to help. The zombies approaching him grabbed his clothes and legs, so he dragged him down. After the main character tried to stop them and save them, people began to run away from them. Nevertheless, people managed to get to the mountain, and everyone remained safe and sound. In addition, the girl came to her senses and remained healthy and unharmed, although her hand hurt very much. There were so many mutants that we did not build a living pyramid from each other and could reach people. Therefore, in order to stop them, the man had to use dynamite. There was a strong explosion, and all the mutants who were nearby died. In addition, part of the building was destroyed, and the people were only miraculously not under the rubble. But even though they had to stop the monsters for a while, others continued to arrive and would soon be able to climb up to them. Therefore, despite this, people continued to run away from them and tried to find a new safe place for themselves. This place was to be the neighboring house, so they began to climb the mountain. However, the zombies continued to pursue them. The girl understood that she had become a burden to people, so she wanted them to just leave her and not drag her along. But the guard, whom she had promised to marry, continued to save her no matter what. He really loved her and could not leave her just like that. He knew that she considered him a freak and that she did not like him. The main character tried to hurry him up and do everything to make him move faster and not betray him. But until he returns his daughter and wife, none of them will die. Now they managed to reach the surface. This place was relatively safe because they could kill all the mutants who tried to get to them. However, there were so many of them that they could not hold them back for so long. People were lucky because there was a television tower on the house and they tried to use it as a bridge to another house. But throwing her to the ground might not be as easy as it seemed at first glance, because she was securely attached to the ground and weighed several hundred kilograms. Jai asked people to hurry up because he wouldn't be able to hold out that long. Nevertheless, Faye managed to shake the tower and eventually the ground under it began to crack. To do this, he climbed to the 7th top so the tower began to fall with him. The man risked his own life so that they could have a chance to escape. But he was very lucky because he stayed alive. Now, they had a chance to get to the neighboring house and be safe. The mutants continued to pursue them as before. When many of them began to move towards them along the antenna, the men tried to throw it to the ground. However, it was so heavy that they couldn't do anything, and the mutants were getting closer and closer. One of them even managed to touch the main character's face. He was about to bite him, but at that moment, the antenna fell and all the mutants on it flew to the bottom. Now, they were safe, and it was possible to take care of the wounded and injured. Faye was very tired. He missed a peaceful and calm life where he could just rest. His friend decided to support him so that the man would not give up and keep moving forward. The girl could never have thought that the man who saved her could be so attentive to her. He did not leave her side and constantly made sure that she drank water, took medicine, and felt good. But he was a doctor by profession, so it was his job that he loved very much. Nevertheless, she finally realized that the man really loved her and was ready to die for her life, so she agreed to marry him after they returned home alive. Hearing this, he burst into tears. He was sure that they would return home and was ready to do everything possible for this. However, Jay understood that they had to leave. It was impossible to stay in such a dangerous place. Suddenly, one of them refused to leave. He wanted to stay. None of the people understood what was happening and why he decided to stay. However, in reality, he could no longer be saved. The man was doomed. His hand turned blue and a deadly infection began to spread throughout his body. He wanted his family to be told that he had simply fallen from a height and not turned into a mutant. Therefore, when people went to the neighboring house, he stayed in the same place. He looked at the photo of his family for the last time. It was their best photo together from the warm and sunny sea. Suddenly, the transformation began. The man began to vomit and bleed. After that, he fell to the ground. And then he finally began to change, becoming a mutant. Now he became one of the mutants who attacked people and were real killers. Finally, the people managed to come to the park, which was teeming with mutants, and there were no tall buildings nearby. Now the men truly understood how important and complex the operation they were about to perform was. The main character was so busy that he had no words, and all the time he was just silent. But before moving on, the men decided to have breakfast and regain their strength. They were in a dangerous place, so they decided to cook the fish they had caught the day before in the lake. Jai was so worried that he couldn't even eat. He refused the food that was offered to him, but he understood that he needed to regain his strength and energy. But instead of eating it himself, he gave his piece to the wounded woman who was sitting aside and watching them. The people were near a department store from which you could get into an underground cave because the shopping center and the dungeon were connected. Going around the square through the underground streets was a very good idea, but there could be many doors inside that were closed, so it would be a big problem to get inside the department store and get from it to the dungeon. However, they simply had no other choice. They could not go around the store through the streets because there were so many mutants there. Without wasting time, the men started moving and the main character was descending on the rope. While the others were holding him, Komi tried to break the glass in order to be able to get inside the store. He was very nervous because he did not know what dangers the store would hide inside. Also, he needed to cut the metal grill that protected him. After that, they were finally able to get inside and were ready for anything. On their way, they found a red door that could lead them to a storage room with supplies, food, and water. Now they had to try to break the lock. The main character succeeded, and now he found himself in a dark and cold room. Inside, there were tables with a lot of cutlery on them. Finally, they realized that they had come to a department where kitchen items were sold. However, they moved on and reached a place where clothes and many other valuable things were sold. However, this was not at all what they were looking for, and so people continued to move on. Finally, they managed to get to a place where there were really valuable things. Many axes, ropes, climbing equipment, and much more. She began to choose, and the first thing that caught his eye was a sharp axe. It was very comfortable and looked sturdy. In addition, it was very expensive and cost a whole $1,000. However, there was nothing else of value in the store. His friends were still unable to pick up anything for themselves. Meanwhile, the woman continued to look at the objects. Her attention was drawn to the mannequin, namely, his plastic hand, which she could use as a prosthesis for herself. Now, the people had a new difficult task. They had to go down, but the escalators were not working. G went first. As a leader, he carefully examined and listened to every rustle. Suddenly, they got into a special section for him. He saw a ring. Suddenly, he remembered events from the past when he and his wife were preparing for the wedding. The ring on his beloved's hand was incredibly beautiful and suited her very well. He remembered how he had promised to buy his wife a much better ring with a large diamond. Then she burst into tears because his goals seemed somehow illusory. However, now he had this opportunity, but he refused such a temptation and put the ring back in place. After all, he was convinced that a real gentleman should achieve his goals independently. However, Jun thought differently. He decided to take the ring with him. The diamond that was there was very strong, and this could help in a critical situation because it could cut glass. After that, they continued to move further through the house. Ahead was the main character, who illuminated the path for everyone else with his own lantern. Ahead, they saw a human corpse, which was still fresh after all had not begun to decompose. This meant that they were not the first people to be inside the store. They had to be careful, because danger lurked around. Suddenly, he stood in a pool of blood. In addition, it was accompanied by a terrible smell. Jun was very familiar. It was the smell of rotting flesh. It could have been spoiled food because zombies did not smell so terrible. Indeed, after a long corridor, the team found themselves in the grocery department, where there was a lot of food and alcohol. Inside the refrigerators were many bottles of wine and champagne. Surprisingly, they were not robbed by looters. In addition, there was a bag full of food lying on the ground, but no one took it. In addition, there was a lot of blood, which was fresh. It became clear that something was wrong with this place, so people decided to leave quickly. But as soon as they were about to turn back, they realized that it was too late. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a terrible scream. It was the voice of hungry craftsmen who began to surround them and were about to attack. In addition, they realized that there were a lot of mutants, and they were not ordinary zombies. Right in front of them was a huge fence that separated them from another room in the store. People began to approach it because turning back was very risky and would take a lot of time. They needed to try to open the metal fence opposite. This would give them the opportunity to move on and shorten the path. But as soon as they began to approach, the terrible scream became louder and more distinct. It seemed that they were cannibals, but there was a lot of food in this city and there was no need to eat other people. Nevertheless, people got ready and turned off the lights. They set up a real ambush and waited for the enemies to come out on them. Now they had a clear plan, and none of them wanted to take any risks, because they did not know what threat awaited them ahead and what the secret of the dark shop would hide. The sounds were getting louder. G realized that the mutants were nearby, and suddenly he saw one of them. He was right behind the fence, where they needed to go. At that very moment, he prepared to attack, and as soon as Monster appeared in front of him, he shot him right in the head, trying to kill him. But it did not help. The mutant did not die, but became even more angry. In addition, other zombies appeared, who ran at the sounds of the shot. Another shot right in the head, even this did not help kill the strong mutant. The battle continued and other people also opened fire. However, even after that, the mutants did not die. Even shots to the head did not help. It became clear, zombies evolved. They became invulnerable to human attacks. The only way to win is to cut off their heads. The men began to flee, because soon, the fence would break. However, there was another way to fight them, and that was what they wanted to check. For this, a lot of alcohol was needed, but fortunately, there was a lot of it on the shelves of the store. After that, when the man found the right amount of alcohol, he started pouring it on the floor. Next, he used paper so that the mixture could be set on fire, and it burned well. Now, he needed to mix the alcohol content and use the paper to set the bottle on fire. He got a Molotov cocktail. Now, they were in a long maze of boxes and crates and did not know from which side the zombies would attack them. But the metal mesh was right in front of them, and G was waiting for the mutants to break it and start attacking. After some time, he heard a characteristic sound. The gate opened. Now, a huge army of mutants was looking for them and was ready to attack and tear people apart in a matter of minutes. These mutants were not like the others. They could think, so they began to look for people. To do this, they looked for traces and tried to catch the characteristic smell of human flesh. Jai understood that they would soon be found, so he could not delay, and he himself went out to meet the mutants. And when the zombies saw him, they began to run straight at the people. But the men were ready for this. They set fire to the cocktail and threw them directly into the crowd. There was an explosion, and a strong fire broke out. As a result, the boxes and cardboard caught fire, and the mutants started burning. But that's not all. After the fire, in order to finish off the zombies, people opened fire. They had a basket. It was full of alcohol, and it was they who sent it into the crowd of the still living dead. Then, a shot. There was another explosion, which was much stronger than the previous one. Everything around caught fire, and very soon, the entire floor of the house was in flames. However, everything was not so simple, because many mutants did not die. Suddenly, one of them rushed at the main character and almost hit him. She managed to dodge at the last moment. Despite such damage, the monster remained alive and even attacked people. The men began to fight, but the main character understood that he needed to cut off his head, and that's exactly what he tried to do. Meanwhile, they managed to open the security door. It was the only chance to get out of the burning room. Therefore, without hesitation, the people went there. But even there were a lot of dangerous mutants, whom the door did not stop. This path was blocked, so they had to quickly turn back and close the door behind them. But suddenly, the noise disappeared. It became very quiet. People were scared, because what could this mean? Suddenly, a strong blow that cut through the heavy metal door. It was an axe. Now all the men tried to block the door together to prevent the mutants from breaking through and killing them all. The zombies continued to break the door, but it was securely locked. This gave the men some time, so they decided to turn back. But there was no way back either, because their clothes started to burn, and due to the strong fire, they simply could not pass. Another way out was the entrance to the underground shopping center. But the door there was also blocked, so people tried to open it. With joint efforts, they managed to do it, and finally, the passage opened. Now it was necessary to break the metal grate. After some time, everything was ready, and the people opened the way in a dark underground tunnel. They started to go down the stairs, but as soon as they started to go lower, they realized that everything was underwater. Now they were knee-deep in water, and their movement slowed down. The water began to collect because the sewage system in the store was not working. Suddenly, they felt strong jolts due to strange sounds. It was a door that could not stand it. The mutants managed to open it, so people had to move as quickly as possible. They started to run. At that time, the zombies were able to feel their ice and began to chase people. Now, the men had to shoot back at them. It was getting deeper and deeper ahead, so they had to use inflatable rings to keep from drowning. In fact, the deep water was their salvation. The zombies couldn't swim, so they stopped. But not for long. because after that, they started climbing the walls and caught up with them again. Moreover, they were moving much faster than people could swim. However, they simply had nowhere to run, because there was a dead end from which there was no way out. They had no other choice, so they had to dive into the water. The man held his breath, then dove in. When they were underwater, they realized that it was very dangerous to return to the surface, because there were already zombies waiting for them. They couldn't swim, so they didn't dive with them. People, holding their breath, tried to turn back and move in the opposite direction. Thus, they could at least slightly break away from them. In order not to suffocate, they inhaled air from inflatable balloons. This allowed them to stay underwater all the time. In addition, there were a lot of mutants under the water who fell into the water and could not swim. At the same time, there were many corpses of other people who once hoped to save themselves in the water, but got stuck. Now, they found themselves at the entrance to the dark corridor from which they came. Only now, when they had broken away enough from the zombies, could they breathe air. Very quickly, people began to climb the stairs. However, it was impossible to relax because the zombies might continue to chase them when they realized what had really happened. Now they were able to get to the fishing shop. It was a place that had a lot of nets and other equipment, and this was exactly what they needed. It didn't take a few minutes, and the mutants had already caught their scent. They started chasing people again. However, now the men could use the nets to grab them. Several zombies fell into the trap and got stuck, but others continued to run. They had to fight them. These mutants were not ordinary, and even a blow to the head would not stop them. The men were protecting each other, risking their own lives, when suddenly one of them was bitten. He saved the main character's life, however, he was mortally wounded. He was bitten on the hand. However, he did not stop and was not going to give up. The man bravely continued to fight, blow after blow. Nevertheless, he managed to return, and in the meantime, when Jun arrived, he was in the parking lot, where he found a motorcycle. In fact, his hand was protected by a huge number of watches. Therefore, he remained whole and unharmed. However, the monster did not die. He got to his feet and simply watched the people. After that, he just ran in the other direction. Very soon, a new monster appeared in his place, much stronger and bigger. Moreover, he was armed and just now rushed at the people. They all started fighting him together. It was necessary to kill him as soon as possible. But as soon as the people started attacking him, something strange happened. After all, the mutant just ran away. For a minute, it became very quiet and peaceful. However, thinking that everything became peaceful was a huge mistake. Suddenly, the walls of the store began to crack because a huge number of zombies who had been outside all the time came running at the smell of blood and the sounds of the battle. They quickly filled the entire floor of the store and began to climb directly onto people. The hungry mutants were looking for their prey and were very hungry. Now people had to flee. They moved in an unknown direction, trying to break away from the pursuit. Ahead lay the motorcycle they had found earlier. There was no other choice, so they decided to simply set it on fire. The flames were able to stop the mutants for a while. It was lucky because they were not like the others. They had no intelligence. From the strong explosion that sounded, people's clothes caught fire. Jai tried to put out the fire and wanted to save his friend. However, very soon, the fire would stop, and people simply had nowhere to run. Ahead stood the strongest and smartest mutant. It seemed he was their leader. It was necessary to escape, urgently. There was very little time. As soon as the fire stopped, the zombies started running after them again. People were lucky. They found an exit to the roof of the house and the door was open. But what happened to the city surprised them all. Houses and entire districts were destroyed. There was no life there. Now, the hope of finding a husband and saving the main character's family became illusory. However, there was no time to waste. Using the objects at hand, they managed to block the door. Now it was necessary to get down from the roof and run. That's exactly what they did and started running. People were running in an unknown direction and saw only human corpses and ruins on their way. They tried to search the bodies of the soldiers in the hope of finding weapons or other valuables. They were lucky because one of them managed to find a machine gun and some ammunition for it. However, now the mutants broke through. They were able to open the door and chase the people again. Despite the fact that the people were constantly running away, they could not completely escape. They ran further and a whole bunch of zombies continued to pursue them. The woman felt very bad. She could no longer and wanted to stay, but her husband couldn't allow it. He agreed to carry her on him as long as she didn't die. There was a plane ahead, which was the only chance to escape. Its tail was high, so it could be the only safe place for them. When the people got to the surface, they started shooting back. That wasn't enough. The only thing they had left was a few bottles of alcohol, which could also be set on fire. In order not to catch fire themselves, they moved to the very end of its tail. After that, a fire started. Now, the mutants didn't rush into the fire, they just chose the same tactics and waited for everything to end. G understood that they would not be able to leave until they tried to kill the main zombie. He understood that he was the one who managed to find them all the time, and the other zombies simply obeyed him and followed him. He had a gun, however. The bullets were not suitable for it. It was necessary to take a risk and try to physically reduce them to the desired size. The most terrible thing happened because the main mutant began to put out the fire. G was recovering. He had the last hope that it would work. If not, they would all inevitably die. Suddenly, a shot, then another one, and more. He managed to hit the zombie right in the head, and he fell dead to the ground. For a very long time, he showed no signs of life, and it seemed that they had managed to kill him. However, this was not so. The mutant was alive. He became even angrier and began to rise to his feet in order to continue attacking people. It was necessary to make a few more shots, however. The cartridge case got stuck, and the man could not get it out. However, they tried to do it. They succeeded. They hit him right in the head, and it seemed that this time they managed to kill him. However, the flame would soon go out, and they had absolutely no idea what to do next. But the only way is the way up, to the tail of the plane. Therefore, one by one, they began to climb the mountain, and from there, it was already possible to fire. When they were at the top, they could try to get to one of the neighboring houses. From there, the distance was not so great, therefore, they managed to get to one of the houses. Now that they had pulled the rope, they could move on and escape from danger until the flames were completely extinguished. There were a lot of mutants on the streets of the city who did not pay attention to the people moving above their heads. Suddenly, the remains of a human hand appeared on the ground. It was bait because the hungry mutant immediately reacted to it. Suddenly, the rope, it tightened as soon as the zombie got inside with his foot. In fact, it was a trap. Someone was trying to catch the mutant. A guy who lived in this part of the city developed a special device with which he caught zombies. After that, he bathed them, tied them up, and held them hostage. Also, he had a lot of clothes, and he carefully selected them for his prisoners. Also, he dyed them. He was not at all afraid that the mutants could bite him. Now, he was carefully preparing for a meeting with them, setting the table with food, with candles and flowers. At such times, it was the only chance not to go crazy and have fun. This girl, who turned into a mutant, he liked since junior high school, and all his life he dreamed only about her. But she didn't even pay attention to him. Every time he got too close to her, he would start to get scared and blush. He even had to run away a few times. However, one day he dared to talk and confessed his feelings for her. But when he realized that he had said too much, he tried to fix it. As a result, he was so scared that he just burst into tears. After that, he ran away again. Even when he got older, he also tried to win her attention. But suddenly, martial law began in the country. There were many soldiers on the street, and now he couldn't see her so often. But even that didn't stop him. Every day he watched, and suddenly, he noticed her in the crowd of zombies. Now, she was his target, which he tried to grab. Only now, she would be next to him. Now he felt very sad. The guy couldn't even think that he would sit next to her in such an atmosphere. His heart ached, but he still loved her. Also, he wanted to feed her and shared a piece of his own food. The zombie started eating. She did it so greedily that she almost bit off his fingers. However, the guy wasn't scared at all. After dinner, he turned on the movie. This movie made him cry every time he watched it. The mutant wanted to bite him. But instead of running away from her, the lover took a few photos. After that, he wanted to play some game with her. But when he turned on the TV, he heard a suspicious sound. Fortunately, he had cameras by which he could determine who it really was. Among the crowd of armed people, he saw a very familiar face. It was his sister. Meanwhile, the people ended up on the next house. Finally, they were safe. Now, it was necessary to try to find the guy. On the roof, they saw a suspicious thing and realized that it was him. Meanwhile, the boy thought that his sister had been taken prisoner. He was so scared that he grabbed his weapon and ran out to attack the people. She was very happy to see him alive and stopped him when he was about to start shooting. Now, he burst into tears because he realized that his sister had given her own hand and risked her life to save him. He could not calm down, but he had already made a choice. In fact, he did not want to go anywhere and was going to stay in his house. His sister did not understand his behavior. Especially the other men who almost died saving him were surprised. In fact, he had special reasons for staying. Very quickly, everyone understood what was really happening because his captive was able to free herself and was just now trying to attack people. But when one of the men swung, the guy stopped him and covered the zombie with his own body. He did not think at all that the monster could bite and kill him. However, fortunately, this did not happen. Jai had time to react and saved his life. The man grabbed the mutant and threw him away. After that, his sister struck and killed the repeater, chopping her head into 2 parts. The poor guy simply could not accept this loss, so he rushed to her dead body. Despite the fact that she was a mutant, he loved her and wanted to stay. However, G knew that there were many other people in the house, but now they had all disappeared somewhere. In the old house, there were people who served his father, and when the epidemic began, they all united to work together. The guy became the main one because he opened a food storage for them, and this quickly won their favor. But everything was not as he thought right away, because he himself had to become an exile. People simply took everything from him. He had to run away just to stay alive. But then he got tired of this life, so he decided to fight no matter what. He had to kill all the people just to survive himself. Everyone wanted him dead. However, time was short, so the boy gathered all the food and things he had and decided to go with them. But new mutants appeared on the street and began to attack them. They had to fight back, so the people fought. When the threat was destroyed, they could continue moving forward. The boy knew the area well, so he led them to a military store. There were a lot of powerful weapons, ammunition, and equipment there. After that, they robbed several more abandoned vans in the hope of finding more valuable resources or weapons. They were lucky because they managed to find a van that had a lot of gasoline in it. The men began to check it. Everything was intact. However, it was necessary to prepare the car for a collision with zombies. As before, they were going to seal the vulnerable spots with mattresses and blankets. Also, the men wanted to disguise it and tried to load all the equipment they could find inside. After that, it was possible to move towards the house. They opened the gate, but there were so many zombies there that there was almost no hope of reaching and breaking through. However, the mutants were running past and none of them paid attention to the car that was just standing in the middle of the street. They waited until the mutants calmed down and stopped. And when that happened, he started to drive away as slowly as he could. They succeeded, and slowly but surely, they started to move. In addition, they tried to move very carefully so as not to accidentally crush anyone and not make noise. Did they really succeed? They drove along the city street, bypassing all the mutants on their way. The driver was so nervous that his legs were shaking. It was important to do everything carefully and correctly. But there were so many mutants around that the road was blocked, so they could not move further. Suddenly, Faye cautiously looked out of the car and fired a shot. Then another one, and several arrows fell at the mutants' feet. A telephone with a timer was tied to one of them. When it started ringing, all the mutants ran towards the noise. Now the road was free of mutants, and people began to move on. The man carefully pressed the gas, and the car rolled down the city street. Now, he was going to do the same thing to try again to distract the mutants who had gathered and blocked the way. Thus, they slowly but surely drove down the city street, approaching salvation. Now the boy confessed why he really left his father. His old man was always kind to him, but he behaved badly with other people. He wanted to ask his friends for forgiveness for him and for having to risk their own lives. Now, they had to survive during the greatest catastrophe that had ever befallen humanity. And the people who were under his father's rule were people who could not find his weakness and continued to live in fear. And what they were doing now was only carrying out a dangerous order. But now they were all in the same boat, and only by working together would their survival depend. Suddenly, the car stopped abruptly. In fact, he hit a dead man and he fell to the ground. Now he was so scared that his heart almost stopped. Immediately, zombies began to roar terribly and attack the car. Mutants surrounded him from all sides and tried to break the glass in order to get inside. With all his might, he began to press the gas in order to break through, and began to crush all the mutants in his path. Now, they needed to break through. At high speed, the car became uncontrollable, so the main character helped to hold the steering wheel so that they did not fly off the road. Now, they were driving under a bridge, and the mutants who were on it could jump onto the car. And so it happened, and now they could get inside through the hatch that was on the roof. In order to stop them, Faye tried to climb onto the roof. From there, he began shooting the mutants approaching them. He shot the last one straight in the head, causing its pieces to scatter into small particles. There were no more mutants on the roof. But the further they moved along the street, the more mutants there were. So now he needed to fry them. From time to time, he threw cocktails at them, which set a huge number of zombies on fire. However, very quickly, he ran out of all his supplies, and now they were practically defenseless. The only hope was that the car would not stop. However, now they have slowed down significantly. There were so many mutants that they could not break through. Because of this, the man tried to do everything possible to keep them moving even at a slower speed. After all, if the car stopped, they would be doomed. Faye continued to sit on the roof and shoot everyone who approached them. But very soon, he would run out of ammunition. Still, there were so many zombies that he could no longer do this. He had to go down inside. The mutants surrounded the car and tried to turn it over. Now the people were stuck. The car stalled and the engine could not be started. Suddenly, the car started to roll over. There were so many mutants that all together they were able to do it easily. They were lucky because the car body was armored. They could hold out like that for a while, but they needed to rest. While the others were sleeping, someone had to sit on duty, and the rookie wanted to be the first to do it. But no one trusted him, so June was the first to be on duty. Everyone else was asleep, and then they had to think about how to get out of the death trap. Meanwhile, everything was calm in his father's house. None of the people knew whether the main character would be able to return alive and save the main character's son. However, his family had to be taken care of. At this time, they were brought food. However, the girl did not want to eat anything. The food she was given was not tasty, and besides, she was used to her mother cooking and did not want anything but her food. In addition, she did not like the suspicious woman. However, in the end, she left the food and left because she was afraid of getting angry and lashing out at them. After her, Uncle Wu went to the room and brought rice rolls. This was exactly what Kari liked. Therefore, she started to eat. And the man was happy and said that such food was very difficult to get in their time. And then, he promised to give her as much as she wanted on the condition that she would just go with him. But the woman kicked him out and also broke a plate on his head. She would not accept such gifts from him again. Silently, he returned and began to clean up the remains of the broken glass. After that, they silently left their room and went away. Feng Yun was so scared that she started crying and trembling. All the time, she held a piece of sharp glass in her hand that cut her. However, she was ready to fight and defend herself, just in case. At night, the man returned. He hoped that the women were asleep and wanted to go into the room very quietly so as not to wake them. Wu began to approach her bed, but he did not notice that Feng Yun was not there. She was not sleeping but was waiting for him to return. And now, she struck and wounded him with a sharp piece of glass right in the chest. His body began to bleed, but she continued to beat him. Wu could not cope with her, moreover, he received a lot of wounds. He begged to spare him, but she did not stop. Feng Yun cut him and then he began to scream and call for help. Feng Yun wasn't even going to let him go, so she just covered his mouth and would beat him until he died and stopped breathing. Finally, he stopped resisting. The whole room was covered in blood. Feng Yun looked at his dead body and understood that now she would have big problems. However, she did it for her own protection. Together with her daughter, they began to pack food and all their belongings. Long ago, she was preparing to escape. She knew that the dead man's body had already been found, so she tried to leave the house and escape as quickly as possible. But they were already being searched for, and panic began among the workers. She hid, however, one of the workers noticed her and found her. After what happened, she was taken to the head, who tried to force them to talk. However, the girls remained silent. Also, another woman was brought into the room, who instead of feeding them buns, gave the girls food. As it turned out, she took the best food for herself, just like Wu did, because leftovers were found in his stomach. After everyone found out the truth, she was taken away and promised to throw it out as food for the mutants. The old man offered the woman to stay and live in his house because he did not believe in the return of her husband. But she did not believe in it and was going to wait for him as long as it took. At that time, his parents were sitting in a new house. They were also waiting for their son to return because they had not heard any news from him for a very long time. Soon they would also run out of food and supplies, so they didn't eat properly. They also knew that the zombie king had disappeared and most likely went in search of his son Jie. They would be in trouble. Meanwhile, the people had to sit in the car until dawn. It was very hot inside, but they noticed that there weren't many zombies left outside. But the woman felt very bad, she couldn't even speak. In fact, she wanted to go to the toilet, but she had to endure it because they couldn't get out of the car. The men offered her a bucket, and they turned away so that she could do it normally. Each of them was going to do the same thing because they had been sitting in the car for a very long time, and everyone wanted to go to the toilet. However, the main character remained very serious. He wanted to try to turn the car over so that they could drive away and get out alive. But in order to do this, it was necessary to go outside, which was too risky. However, there was space between the car and the road, and they could use it to try to push themselves off. They were still several kilometers from the nearest bay, and covering this distance on foot would be very dangerous. And when a new wave of zombies appears, they will simply park the car against the wall so that they will not be turned over again. Now, Ji started to prepare for the implementation of his new plan. He needed to push a special inflatable tire in order to start pumping it. When everything was ready, he started pumping. Surprisingly, everything started to work out as he thought. The others were happy when they realized that they also had a new hope for salvation. So now, everyone took turns doing it and helped the hero. Now slowly their car started to rise. In addition, they needed to try to rock the car. So, on account of this, they all ran to the other wall of the van, trying to rock it. It started to work out, however, the first push was not enough. But another time, everything worked out, and now they were on wheels and could continue moving. The man slammed on the brakes with all his might. They made a lot of noise and the zombies couldn't help but notice it. While there weren't too many of them, the men had to escape. Suddenly, a bag of urine flew right into one of the mutants' faces. Very quickly, their car was surrounded. Now, the men had to slow down again. They had to wait again until the zombie wave subsided and only then move on. However, this time everything was not as easy as before, because much stronger mutants appeared, who had weapons and tried to break the glass. Due to strong impacts, the windshield began to crack, and now people were in danger. As it turned out, these zombies were much smarter than those they had seen before. The main character took a gun and waited. He pushed its barrel into the crack and fired, hitting the strongest of the mutants who were trying to attack the car. Now they needed to start the car and try to move on. Also, it was worth throwing zombies from the roof that threatened them and could get inside. The guys got to work. They shot zombies and tried to escape from the deadly trap. Also, they tried to rock the car, shifting gears to crush the mutants and knock them off their feet. However, this was not enough, and G decided to take a desperate step. He left the car and tried to run in order to distract the attention of the dead. He succeeded because they started running after him. At the same time, the car could move. In order to avoid pursuit, he had to climb onto the house. He was very lucky because the window of one of the apartments was open. He took advantage of this, so he quickly climbed inside. However, he was in no hurry because he did not know what danger would await him there. In fact, it was empty inside, and now he breathed a sigh of relief. There were a lot of things in the house, so he could use them for his own purposes. He tried to move the heavy furniture closer to the window. After that, he broke the glass and started throwing them straight into the street. So he managed to crush a large number of zombies that were preventing the car from moving on the street. The noise that was created after the fall drew attention from others. Therefore, each time he managed to kill even more new mutants. His plan worked, but now he was in another danger. How could he turn back and catch up with everyone else? Taking advantage of this situation, people began to press the brakes and the car drove off. Jai did not relax and continued to search. He wanted to set fire to the fabric that he also found. And for this, he applied a special wax that could easily catch fire. After that, he gathered other flammable substances that he could find in the house and threw them right into the huge crowd of mutants. Now it was time to set fire, and he did it. The huge crowd of mutants caught fire, and he was pleased that he managed to do it. When people broke away to a safe distance, they stopped and wanted to try to contact the main character. Jai started to catch up with them, and when he was already close, they opened the hatch and let him inside. Now, they started to drive as fast as they could. They needed to get to the shore as quickly as possible because it was the only place that would lead them to salvation. There were a lot of zombies on the street, and it was difficult to drive the car. But they managed to do it, and they ended up a few meters from the shore. In order to get into the water faster, they had to take a risk, so they rammed the fence. Now their car was in the water. Before it completely sank, they were able to get to the surface and were going to transfer to the inflatable boat that they carried with them all the time. When everything was ready, the people began to swim. But even now, the monsters were chasing them and moving along the shore without entering the water. Now they managed to get closer to the bridge. There they stopped. The men wanted to wait until nightfall and hide from the zombies. And when it got dark, they could continue swimming further. All the zombies who were waiting on the bridge left, and now they calmly floated down the river with Feng Yun. But when they approached the factory, Ji grabbed his weapon. His friends did the same and surrounded the girl and the man who was protecting her. He wanted them to return home and tell the owner that the job was done. They had no choice, so the guard took her with him and left. Meanwhile, the main character and his friends watched what was happening. Faye also had to return to find his father and tell him to send some people after them just in case. Meanwhile, the woman managed to get to her own father's house. However, her brother stayed with the men, and it was him that the man constantly watched. He was very happy when he saw that his son was alive and well. Now, they were ready for a deal. The old man wanted to start in order to pick up his own son faster and not make him wait so long. Therefore, it all started and two people swam to meet the main character. Feng Yun and his daughter were with them. The boy was thrown into the water and forced to swim to meet his own father. He did this on the shore. He was met by guards who helped him get up. Meanwhile, a man approached the main character, who reported that his son was safe. He suggested starting to pursue the woman and abandon the deal. But the man refused because he was afraid he would be killed, knowing that Ji was nearby and was preparing to shoot. Therefore, he ordered everyone to retreat and return home. But when the woman was on the boat, she did not see her husband there and was very scared. However, her friends supported her and said that he would return soon. Meanwhile, the main character began to return. Finally, they met again and could return home. For the first time in a long time, they all gathered together and sat at the same table. Only now did they feel like normal people because there was normal food and water downstairs. Moreover, the men brought with them the products that the old man had promised to give for the return of his son. Therefore, now they could eat as much as they wanted. However, it was impossible to forget at what cost they had won this victory because the men almost died. In addition, there were different rules of survival on the island, and there was a threat that others would try to take away their food. Despite the scale of the disaster, there were still people in the city who were fighting for survival. They could pose a threat to others. However, it was possible to try to connect with them and work together for survival. The quarantine that was in the country could not contain the situation, and it was not known whether other cities in the country had suffered as much as their capital. However, none of them knew what the situation was in other regions of the country, and everything was so bad. However, Feng Yun did not know what happened to her parents because all contact with them was lost. Jai could not watch her cry. He felt sorry that her parents could not be found. Other people asked him what he thought about the situation in the country. He was the only one who had seen zombies so closely and fought with them, so only he could know what to expect next. However, from the news, it was known that the cases of infection were not only in their country, but all over the world. This meant that the situation could be much worse, but they did not receive news from the outside world. There was a radio in their house, and they could try to catch the signal. Also, during the journey, Ji realized that the zombies were becoming more dangerous. Many of them could think and had intelligence, so fighting them was much more difficult than fighting others. The man even came up with his own name for them, because these creatures were very different. It seemed that they were monsters that had gained knowledge. The basic intelligence that they were endowed with was most likely obtained in the outside world, but they still ate and hunted people. During his journey, he managed to meet several of them. The main zombie had a very high level of intelligence, and it was very difficult to fight with people like him, because even mutants could learn, and it seemed like something fantastic. In addition, they were much stronger than other zombies, and mutated so much that it was not as easy to kill them as others. People were afraid because it seemed that at this rate, all zombies would be able to evolve and become much stronger. Then, everyone would be in mortal danger. Jai tried to calm them down because despite the fact that the zombies were scary, people were protected and were in a safe place. However, the house needed repairs. They were all one family now and had to work as one. Suddenly, the man managed to find a radio on which some Chinese announcement was being broadcast live. The government asked citizens to take care of themselves and their families during the pandemic because times were very difficult now. People were asked to take care of each other and, if possible, not to leave safe premises. The virus was very dangerous, especially since there were dozens of other types of the most dangerous virus, which spread through the air and, moreover, constantly mutated. People had to try to grow food in their own homes and stock up on the necessary amount of water. Those of them who could survive in coastal areas would be able to receive shelter from the government and the necessary supplies. People who lived deeper in the country had to survive on their own and look for supplies on their own. Next, she told people about the knowledge and self-defense capabilities that could be useful on the street and in the battle against the dead. Not far from them was an island, and the main character had been there several times on vacation with his family. In addition, there were few people there, and it was really beautiful. But they were now very far from there, and it was too dangerous to go there. No one knew if they would have enough strength to reach the island, where it could be safe. However, the hero believed that they needed a backup plan, even though they had plenty of food at the moment. As before, there were a lot of problems, and sooner or later, food and even water could run out. He was convinced that it was necessary to go. But not now. At this moment, it was necessary to think about defense and how to protect themselves from attacks by other people. In addition, it was very difficult to get to the sea because they had no transport. It was very difficult to drive on the road because the last trip showed that there were a lot of mutants on the streets who blocked the car. There was another good idea. I thought it would work because they could not try to go to the sea across the river, but for this, they needed a boat. They could try to find it on the nearest coast or build it themselves. This idea was liked by absolutely everyone, and technically, it should have worked. Other people listened attentively to the broadcast, trying to understand when exactly the outbreak of the virus occurred. People had a lot of ideas about this, and they thought that the quarantine was deliberately not carried out for so long so that more people would be affected. However, now the signal was gradually restored at last. They could turn on the radio and listen to it all the time. That same evening, work began, and it was very loud in the house. All the men worked to improve their homes and make them stronger. But it was very difficult to do because they had to work very hard both day and night. But this did not scare any of them, and they tried to turn their house into a real fortress. They began to build new walls. Also, tried to close all the windows or no one could get inside through them. Everyone worked very hard and diligently. Therefore, in a matter of days, everything was ready. Now the windows did not pose such a big threat to them. In addition, they began to build a special metal frame, which was supposed to serve as reliable protection for their house. In addition, they built a cage from the metal that remained. The men wanted to use it to get prisoners there. However, the construction continued, and they began to build new structures. Everyone did everything in their power, and they worked for a common goal. The desire to survive united them all. Therefore, everyone was motivated and did everything possible. In addition, the men looked after the plants that grew on their roof. These were potatoes and many others that they managed to plant. This was not an easy job because the plants had to be constantly looked after and watered. One day, when the man was taking care of the plants, he heard a strange sound from behind. As it turned out, he was trying to get to their base and used a rope for this. He threw it from a neighboring house and tried to get to the roof of their building using the rope. The unknown person did this very unsuccessfully because he very quickly gave himself away because he was making noise. He almost managed to get to their house, but the men were getting ready to meet him. They armed themselves and greeted him before capturing him. Faye was so angry that she almost killed him on the spot, but she understood that the man could be useful because he could be interrogated. So they took him inside their house and tied him up, trying to find out more information. The man said that he had caught him while he was trying to get into their territory through the roof of the building. The main character watched him carefully and tried to understand who this stranger really was. She tried to talk to him, but he was silent and did not say a word. Now the men had no choice but to use force and get their weapons, which they did. Finally, he promised to kill him if he did not tell anything. Moreover, he recognized this boy whom he saved in the past. The little one was one of the cannibals who killed their people before. Moreover, he saved him twice. When Faye realized who this guy was, he started beating him. Surprisingly, the little one started laughing, and it seemed that he was not afraid at all. He did not believe that the main character was capable of this and would be able to kill him because he had not done it before. His words made the man stop. The little one warned that they would come for him in the evening, so the people needed to prepare for a new battle with much stronger enemies. No one believed him because his people lost last time and it seemed that they had no strength left for a new attack. But in reality, there were much more of them than it seemed. Besides, they had firearms and armor. The main character tried to understand him because he thought that he was just trying to scare them. However, he knew that the cannibals were robbing and killing everyone around, and there was no doubt that they were going to do the same to them. The little one could have escaped from them a long time ago, but he had nowhere to go, so he was in the spotlight and did not know what to do. Many of the people believed him and that the little one really wanted to change and become a normal person. Jai wanted to learn much more about the cannibals and asked the little one to tell everything that was known there. Since the time the leader died, they were left alone and did whatever they wanted. Their horse was planning real chaos and food was running out. Also, I told about the tactics with which they were going to attack them, and this gave people the opportunity to understand everything and prepare. The main character, although he did not believe his words, decided to be reassured and prepare for battle. That same evening, as the little one said, everything began. The enemy attack began exactly at the time he said. As was already known, they used hooks to attack. Everything was clearly according to plan, and it seemed that the little one was really telling the truth. It was lucky because it was very visible outside. But time passed, and when the hooks were thrown, no one was looking for them, and the enemies did not appear. Were they really deceived, and in fact, the guy just broke into their trust and used him again? But the man was in no hurry. A lot of time passed, and the people got tired of waiting for the enemies to appear. They spent all the time on the roof of the house waiting for the attack, but nothing happened. Several hours had passed since the hooks appeared on the roof, but still nothing had happened. When the men were about to go into the house, everything started and the enemies began to climb towards them. There were so many of them that it became scary and incomprehensible how it was possible to defeat them. Now, it became clear that there would be no clash and it was necessary to fight. A battle began between the men and they had to manage to unhook the hooks before the enemies got to the roof. That's exactly what they did. So many enemies fell to the ground, where they were eaten by zombies. Shots began to ring out and the enemies opened fire on them. But the people managed to prepare even for this because they used metal shields. In addition, they tried to take a retaliatory blow. But at this very moment, the enemies began to use fire, which was a very deadly and effective weapon. Very quickly, the women tried to put out the fire so that the men wouldn't get burned. The people kept a deft defense and waited for the enemies to approach them themselves. When she tried to do this, they simply shot them in the face. Others they easily killed with cold steel, smashing their heads. Because they were well prepared, none of them were injured and all remained alive. Everyone who could hold a weapon tried to fight and do everything possible to win this battle. Even old people who could not fight tried to untie the hooks. The strongest stood in front and the weakest supported them from behind. This tactic turned out to be very effective because the enemies suffered huge losses and could not even reach their house. The strongest moved ahead and it was they who suffered the greatest losses. Suddenly, Faye was wounded. He was immediately given medical care and the others covered him. Then, the most interesting part of the operation began. After all, while the enemies were busy with the battle and trying to get to the neighboring house, the main character, together with the strongest men, managed to surround them and go in from behind. Now the enemies were in mortal danger. Jai, together with the others, simply began to shoot them in the back, killing everyone in their path. They killed everyone and spared no one. They did not need prisoners, so they did everything quickly and cold-bloodedly. They had the best weapons, the best protection, and a lot of ammunition. However, the main character hesitated. He could not kill the women and other children. When one of them tried to ask him to let them go when he was ready to do so, the girl had knelt down before and begged him not to do this. Still, they didn't kill everyone, and she was going to take some of them prisoner. Faye was the only one who was wounded, but he was very lucky because it wasn't serious. In total, they took a few prisoners, and the rest were dead. However, what were they going to do with the prisoners? Wasn't it easier to just kill them and force the women to work? But the main character and his friend didn't like this idea. Therefore, they were going to make their own decisions and decide their fate. Despite the fact that they were mountaineers, they only deserved death, and they were ready to kill each of them for what they had done in the past. This decision was not easy for him, but he understood that it was necessary. There was not much food to feed the prisoners, so he ordered to kill them all. After that, they were simply thrown from the roof. And on the ground, zombies were already waiting for them, who ate them all and tore them to pieces. The next day, people lived a normal life in a city that was teeming with mutants. Those who could looked after vegetables, and others built fortifications. Jen went fishing because he really wanted to eat normal food and meat. He managed to catch a fatty fish, and he was satisfied. After a successful hunt, he decided to return. In fact, he brought food for his wounded comrade because he wanted you to recover faster. Seeing this, the man was very happy because he loved this food and was grateful for such a gift. However, he was very upset because he became incapacitated for a while. He was sorry that he was looked after like a small child. Although on the other hand, he understood that it was necessary, and no one wanted to risk his life. Meanwhile, the main character went on a special mission. He personally tried to explore the city and find a way to save his team. And when no one saw, he just cried, because only he knew how hard it really was for him and how much effort he put in to make everyone happy. He remembered how he and his wife constantly argued because he was away for a long time and he tried to make her life better. She constantly yelled at him because he was an irresponsible person and didn't understand how much he tried for her. But now, he felt very sorry for his family because they were suffering and living in such a terrible time. It was at this moment that he decided to change everything and promised to make every effort to get them out of this city. The man didn't want to stop there and tried to do much more for them. Therefore, he decided to go on a journey. On the way, he was constantly reminded of their quarrels and how he hurt his loved one. He loved her very much and was ready to give his life for her. And even more, he loved his daughter, to whom he always wanted to be an ideal father. Preoccupied with his thoughts, he completely lost his vigilance. And it was at this moment that he realized that the ground under his feet began to collapse. He stepped on a fragile piece of the roof, therefore collapsed. In fact, he fell into a trap and found himself right in the heart of the enemy camp. The enemies, who were cannibals, wanted to kill him. But at the last moment, he managed to shoot at the enemy who was trying to strike. However, there were many more of them, and another one hit him right in the head. The man lost consciousness, his eyes closed, and for a while he only heard the voices that were around him. The voices said that he looked very good and had a strong body. They were really pleased with their prey and they couldn't wait to taste his meat. They were cannibals who were going to eat him, suddenly when he saw the events of his childhood. At that moment, he was a little boy who lived a carefree life, and one morning, his sister woke him up. He remembered how they ate seaweed with her. She also gave him water, but even that didn't help, because as before, he was still very hungry. They decided to go to the store to eat. The girl gave him everything and didn't ask for anything. She lied that she wasn't hungry. That morning, he felt very bad, and she tried to cure him. His parents weren't with him, so she was the only one who took care of him. At that moment, they were truly happy. Even though they were living on the verge of poverty, parents could not afford to buy themselves normal food, so the children survived by trying to earn money. They had to drink water in which they placed salt. This food was very tasteless. However, they had no other choice. The little boy liked it and was willing to drink it all the time, because it was the only thing that kept him from feeling hungry. That day, he drank so much that he felt sick again. He felt very bad and wanted to ask for help. But it didn't help. His stomach hurt so much. And then, for the first time in his life, he lost consciousness. The sister thought he had died and started crying. In the future, they were always together. But when the sister got older, she didn't pay as much attention to him as she used to. He also had an older brother with whom he didn't have a good relationship. The older brother didn't take him with him because he thought he was boring. However, one day everything changed, because the boy returned home to take the little one with him. He felt sorry for his younger brother, who was always alone at home. His parents were gone, so he was very lonely and scared. For the first time, he took him with him to swim with other older boys. As it turned out, They were not far from the same island they were going to get to now. Therefore, in order to show him to his younger brother, the older brother took him with him and started swimming. It was necessary to hold on tightly because there was a very strong current, and the little one did not know how to swim, so he risked drowning. Immediately, they began to swim. Very quickly, they found themselves in the middle of an island, which was located on a river outside the city. This island was a real urban legend, so there were many people who wanted to get to it. But there was one very interesting detail that immediately attracted his attention and was remembered for the rest of his life. There were a lot of leeches there, which were dangerous for people. They managed to find one of them. He was interested in learning more about it because he had never seen one like that before. They climbed out to cling to a person and suck blood. His sister had grown up, but he still spent a lot of time with her. She looked after him, and it was obvious how tired she was. She took him to school and really could replace his mother. He had to work part-time and take exams for other people. His parents were fired and had no money. His older brother worked all year so that they could survive and have at least some money for food. The little one didn't need to worry because he considered himself old enough to provide for him by earning money. But one day, something changed. He, along with his family and his brother, went to the river and found himself in a very difficult situation. His family began to drown, but the brother who rushed to save them also found himself in danger and began to drown. Now, he had to choose which one of them to save. Never before in his life had it been so difficult. He loved his brother very much. Even more, he loved his own wife and child. The man cried. Now he saw again this vision that he had seen for many years in terrible nightmares. His loved ones and other people who died asked to save them. Now they were being taken away by zombies. It was all because of the epidemic. The man hated himself for not being able to turn back time and save his brother and sister. He loved them because they were the ones who replaced his parents. But now he was left alone in a cruel world, and he had to fight. G promised to kill everyone who was involved in the death of his loved ones and who had caused him harm. Suddenly he woke up. This dream was so terrible that he simply could not sleep. Now that he realized that he was in an unfamiliar city, his hands were tied and now he needed to find a way to get out. In the room with him lay many other people who were also prisoners and who were very cruelly tortured. He tried to get up and go to his neighbor because he did not even show signs of life. He was so badly mutilated that he lost his legs and could not move on his own. Also, some incomprehensible substances were injected into his body. He spoke incomprehensible words and it was impossible to understand what he really wanted. Jai leaned over him to try to understand his language. As it turned out, the man was lucky to save him because his children were waiting for him at home and were hungry. Now he needed to come up with a plan and a way to get out of here alive. The stone walls were too thick, so he wouldn't be able to break through them. But in the dark corner of the room, there was something else, much more terrifying than a sick invalid. Approaching there, he saw a zombie who started screaming and roaring. He was tied up, he was sitting on a chair, and all the time trying to free himself. Besides, he had been here for several days and was very hungry. His chair was securely bolted to the floor with metal nuts, so he couldn't escape. It seemed that the zombie in the past was also a person who was captured. The monster was chattering its teeth. It seemed that it was trying to show or say something. However, it was obvious that it had no intelligence. The hero threw a wooden board into its mouth and it immediately ate it. However, it still remained hungry because saliva was flowing from its mouth. Suddenly, Jai noticed a very interesting thing on the floor. He had to bend down to get a better look and understand what it really was. As it turned out, it was shards of glass that were scattered on the floor under his Sagittarius. He managed to take one of them, and this could be the key to his salvation. But as soon as he was about to cut the rope, he noticed that someone was entering the room. He saw an unknown person standing behind a metal fence, but due to the poor light, he could not understand who it was. A bandit entered, holding a knife in his hands and being very aggressive. He accused the main character of killing his leader. After that, he dealt him a strong blow to the stomach. Then he didn't stop but continued to beat him even harder. Another punch to the stomach, this time much harder. The man was on the ground and the man continued to finish him off with his feet. Now when he grabbed him by the hair and tried to lift him up, he promised to treat him the same way as a bedridden patient. He was going to chop him into pieces and make him die very slowly. Another punch and he tore out his braids. But he was going to give the man one chance if he asked nicely and wanted the main character to tell him his story. In response, G only laughed. He wasn't going to give up so easily and was ready to endure and fight until the very end. Another blow, so strong that anyone in his place would have already given up. The bandit promised to give him one last chance again and began to threaten. He was going to kill him right there. But the hero was not like everyone else. He didn't even want to listen to him and knew that he wouldn't be killed right away. The beatings continued. Despite the fact that the man constantly threatened him, he understood that he couldn't just beat this prisoner like that. It seemed that Ji had seen him before. He started talking about his wife and other people that he simply ate because he was a cannibal. Now, the enemy really got angry. He grabbed a knife and really wanted to cut his throat, but he was stopped by a fat woman who entered his cell. She admired how brave the man was and how bravely he looked death in the eyes. Now, he thought, because he understood that now they would try to torture him. However, the woman approached the mutant with pieces of human flesh. She tried to feed him and he ate everything she gave him. Now, it was the protagonist's turn and she was also going to feed him. She called all her captives family, and even if one of them turned into a zombie, they still continued to watch over and care for him. However, her ideas about family were wrong. Also, because she didn't notice how badly the protagonist was beaten, because there were many bruises on his face. She tried to calm him down and promised that they wouldn't kill him because they had other plans for him. However, the man had one question. He wanted to know what made them become cannibals and why they chose this path. But in reality, she didn't consider her actions to be anything bad because they were just trying to survive like everyone else did. However, they could have just grown plants and made provisions. What really made them start eating people? But they weren't farmers and never knew how to grow plants properly. They allowed themselves to hurt other people, kill families, and eat them. In fact, they considered it a real struggle for survival and believed that only the strong had the right to live in such a world. But if they felt like they were in the shoes of those people they kidnapped, the enemy answered calmly and said that in such a situation he would simply accept it. Besides, he still wanted to kill him because he was very hungry. But his colleague thought that the main character was not so open and needed more time to talk. She tried to convince him and make him talk, so I wanted to find out information about other people who lived with him. But the man was silent, so she had to just leave. Suddenly, he stopped her because their conversation was not over yet. Now, he stood up and just grabbed her by the hair. After she was on the ground, he ran towards his enemy and tried to kill him, but the other had a knife. He managed to dodge the first blow, and the enemy missed. Now, they were on the ground and started fighting. At the last moment, when the knife almost pierced Jai, an old sick man came to the rescue who was waiting for his time. With all his strength, he bit him on the hand with which he was holding the knife. After that, he jumped on his neck and tried to throw him off. In a terrible struggle, the enemy began to bite him and managed to bite off the old man's finger. But he did not even stop and continued to bite him even more. Now, in the midst of the battle, Jai took the knife from him and freed himself. The advantage was on his side, and now he could kill his offender with his own weapon. In addition, he saw that the woman fell directly on the monster, and he started biting her. Now, she was infected with a deadly infection, and very soon, she would also turn into a mutant. The zombie gnawed at her thick neck. But suddenly, she began to get up. Now, she became the same mutant as him and was ready to tear everyone in her path. Jai was not afraid. He was simply ready for anything, and cut off her head. Now all his enemies were dead. He killed the mutant who tried to attack him. He raised the poor man who saved his life because if it weren't for the old man, it is not clear how their confrontation would have ended. After that, he tied up the living enemy because he didn't want to kill him. Such a death would be too easy for him. He started cutting his body with a sharp piece of glass, causing incredible pain. After that, he beat him, just like he did to him. Blow after blow, but G didn't stop. And when he lost consciousness, he left, leaving him in the cell. Now, he was in enemy territory and was moving carefully around the house. He heard many other people's voices and tried to reach the roof of the house to try to escape. In one of the rooms, he saw a woman who was armed and holding a gun in her hands. He managed to overhear their conversation and that they were going to attack other groups of people who were hiding nearby. Yes, they were trying to find new resources for themselves because every day it became less and less. Suddenly, another man came out of the next room, who noticed that the people who went to the pantry to the prisoners had not returned for a long time. He became curious about what happened and actually wanted to check what happened there. But as soon as he said this, the main character attacked him. He could not delay any longer and used his body to cover himself from the bullets. The frightened woman started shooting, but instead of killing the main character, she simply shot her partner. When he approached her, he did the same and simply took her weapon. Now he had a weapon and ammunition for it. He moved through the house, searching every room on his way, and killed everyone he saw. He didn't need prisoners. The dead bodies of his enemies lay on the stairs and in other rooms. They tried to escape, however, they could not save themselves. He did not stop and moved on, looking for valuable items in the house. Suddenly, he managed to find a barrel that had a lot of water in it. Now he could drink to his heart's content. In addition, he decided to wash off all the dirt and blood that covered his body. After he washed, he was going to return to his captive. The beaten man had already come to himself and was trying to crawl away. However, Jai stopped him right at the exit from the cage. He took him by the hair and threw him back. Now when he started to pull out his hair, just like they did to him, He repeated to him his words about the survival of the fittest and was going to do to him the same thing that he had experienced. The enemy began to cry and beg to let him go and have mercy because he wanted to live and was going to change everything. However, the man did not believe a single word he said and was not even going to let him go. And even when he realized what fate awaited him, he began to cry, calling himself a coward. Now that he took out a knife and was going to kill him, he began to cut him into pieces and at first wanted to do with him the same thing he did with the poor old man. He wanted to cut off his legs and sell him for the same life. He cut off a piece of meat from under his legs and was going to cook it for the enemy. But he did not want to do this and again asked to let him go. But even if he learns all his crimes and promises never to do such a thing again, his fate will not change. Realizing this, the enemy began to cry. Still, he agreed to do what he was told. He ate his own meat because he hoped that after that he would be released. But it was not so because the man continued to cut. He was in so much pain that he begged to be let go and was ready to do anything, just so that this suffering would stop. But Ji reassured him because he would not die from the 2 lost pieces of meat. He lost consciousness from the pain. Now Jai approached the old man who had saved him and watched what was happening. He was scared because he thought that the hero was going to do the same to him. But in fact, it was not so at all. He took him with him and was going to save him. Together with him, they tried to get to his house. But the old man understood how hard it was for him to carry him, so he asked to just leave him to die. He was ashamed to be such a burden because he could not help him in any way. He told the main character where his family lived and the house was, so he took him there. When the children and wife saw their father in such a state, they started crying. He lost his legs, but remained alive. The children were grateful to the savior who brought him to the family. And they all bowed down to him. This so impressed Jai that he decided to return and asked them to get up. He also left them some food, water, and other supplies that could be useful for a while and help them survive. Moreover, if he managed to survive, he promised to return or send someone else to help. And when he left, the man burst into tears. He thanked his savior because now he could be with his family. Meanwhile, his family began to worry about their own father because he had been away from home for a very long time. Feng Yun tried to explain to her daughter that he would be back soon, but she wasn't so sure. Suddenly, another resident of the house came running to them, who was very scared. She quickly took everyone with her and led them to a safer place. Meanwhile, unknown people were trying to get inside. But the men blocked the door and were waiting for them inside with weapons. With each blow, the force became greater, and soon the door would break. They were waiting. Another blow, even stronger than the previous one. Suddenly, the door broke. Very soon, the force that broke it would show. The men tensed up and were ready to open fire. But for a while, it became very quiet, and nothing happened at all. They were prepared for the worst. Suddenly, a strange silhouette appeared. They were monsters they had never seen before. The mutants that entered did not look like ordinary zombies. They were monsters much stronger and smarter than all other mutants. People started shooting, trying to stop the terrible mutants. Meanwhile, the women who were inside also armed themselves and prepared themselves. They didn't know what was happening behind the door, so it was still very scary. Feng Yun started crying and couldn't control her emotions. She took her weapon because if they were going to die, they would all die together and in battle. After a few shots, the monsters disappeared. The men didn't want to leave the house because they didn't know how many of them there were. They didn't leave until morning. Now, they were trying to figure out how the mutants managed to find them. As it turned out, there was a lot of blood on the walls of the house, and the monsters were able to reach the roof of the house. Now they knew about their house, and there was no doubt that they would soon come again and try to attack again with even greater forces. Meanwhile, the main character was trying to get to the house. Along the way, he tried to search the houses in an attempt to find survivors or other valuable resources. One of these houses was his brother's house, where he lived with his children. However, there was no one there. Ji went through all the rooms, but he never found anyone. Room after room, he did not give up hope of finding any living people. He looked into every door in the hope of finding at least someone. However, all his efforts were in vain. There were no traces of a fight, bloodstains, or weapons in the apartment. It was very clean. The only thing he noticed was a note on the table, which said that his brother was going to go to an island, which was his only hope for survival. This gave him hope because his brother could be alive. On the wall, he saw many photos of them together. These were photos of his family, friends, parents, and loved ones. Also, there were many photos of them together, in which they were with him and standing next to each other. Everything in this house reminded him of his brother and how they spent time together. All these things were very familiar and dear to him, and he lived all the moments with him again. He found a thing that was special to both of them because it belonged to their friend who had not been with them for a long time. The man almost cried, but he couldn't leave this empty place for a long time. Still, he couldn't waste so much time on it, so he just left. The next day, renovations began in their house. Realizing that the mutants would come again, people tried to prepare and replace the damaged doors. In addition, they were constantly watched by monsters who hadn't gone too far and were preparing to attack again. At that moment, they were looking straight at them and planning the worst. The worst thing was that now the monsters knew about their house and could prepare. Despite the fact that they had prepared, there were still many vulnerable spots in the house that still needed to be finished. There was a threat that the mutants would want to use them to get inside. One of the men had an idea. They could try to grease the ropes with oil, cut the pipes, do everything possible to prevent anyone from getting inside. Now, all the people had to live in one room for their own safety. This room was one of the most protected in the house. Grandma was going to give Feng Yun one of the best beds because she was the mother. Now all the people were united, although they had not even met before. The disaster brought them all together, and now their survival depended only on each other. At first, Feng Yun was against the idea of her husband finding other people, but now she only regretted that they had not done so earlier. After all, if they had stayed in the apartment, they would have been dead a long time ago. Her words touched the grandmother so much that she almost burst into tears. In fact, everyone was very scared, so the women hugged each other. They supported and reassured each other, and this was the only way to overcome the fear and doubts that arose in them. So they sat until evening, alone in the room. Meanwhile, the men were preparing for a new attack. The guards, who had walkie-talkies and weapons with them, began to walk along the corridor. The men checked every place in the house, trying to anticipate an attack. There were guards on every floor. The house was constantly under surveillance. Other men sat near the door that led to the roof of the house. They warmed themselves with warm drinks. Everyone was ready. Soon, everything would begin. Even in these difficult times, they supported each other and tried not to lose heart. In such a difficult situation, it was necessary for them. Being together, they began to talk for the first time in a long time and were able to learn more about each other. The father did not know his son's friends at all, but he understood that these guys were very brave and were ready to give their lives for him. As it turned out, the old man knew his parents because in the past they were friends and spent a lot of time together. Every time Faye woke up, he hoped that the disaster was over and all people could return to normal life. In fact, he had a girlfriend whom he loved very much. But when it all started, he lost touch with her, and now he didn't know where she was. And then the old man told about the fact that the main character went in search of his lost brother and sister. Meanwhile, Ja continued to search. He moved through the dark subway tunnel. It was a safe place because there were a lot of mutants outside, especially at night. He lit his way and followed his heart. The man did not know what awaited him ahead and what dangers the dark tunnel hid within itself. However, the call of his heart and the desire to find the truth forced him to go forward. He did not do this for himself. He had long been indifferent to himself. Suddenly in front of him, he saw a huge number of mutants who were hungry. But how did all these zombies end up here? Now, the monsters noticed him and began to attack. It became clear that he was in great danger. Therefore, he had to run. He ran away from them as fast as he could. If the monsters came from the other side, he definitely wouldn't have a chance to escape. Therefore, he had to do it faster than them in order to be able to get out alive and return. Suddenly, the man fell. He started rolling, and his equipment and supplies started falling to the ground. Also, he lost the only source of light he had. His flashlight fell out. He couldn't find it, so now he was in complete darkness. The man was already preparing to die when suddenly he noticed that the monsters started to bypass him and run towards the flashlight. Then he didn't understand at all. How was this possible at all, and why didn't the zombies pay attention to him? Jai just watched as the monsters tried to find his flashlight and started fighting for it. After that, they just moved on. Now the man understood everything. He had a suspicion that zombies couldn't be seen in the dark. But he wanted to check it, so he hid another flashlight that he had. There was a pebble under his feet, which he was going to throw at one of the mutants. The man just wanted to test his theory in practice. He had nothing to lose, so he did it. He managed to hit the mutant right in the head, so he immediately turned back to him. But he didn't attack. It seemed that he just didn't see him. But suddenly he started screaming and roaring. It seemed like it didn't work. However, the man waited patiently. Suddenly, he turned on the light and shone it right in his face, which made him stop for a second. The mutant was approaching, and soon he was a few meters away from him. When he attacked, the hero had to dodge it, because he could have died. He kept him under his sights, but did not shoot. Now, the zombie began to circle, trying to catch him. It seemed that he really did not see him, and only reacted to noise and other sounds. Now he had no doubt left. Monsters really couldn't see in the dark, so if you moved very quietly, you could fool them. He watched the crowd of dead people behind him, but he decided that it was okay to go on because it was safe. Now, carefully and very quietly, he entered the abandoned train. It was also very dark and scary there. There was a lot of blood and dead bodies in the cars. He walked without stopping. From fear, his legs began to tremble, and he tried to walk very slowly and quietly. Suddenly, a gun was on the ground. It belonged to a dead passenger and seemed to be in working order. Its owner, a poor tourist, was dead. In addition, the corpse had a lot of other useful equipment that could be useful. Therefore, the hero carefully searched it. Nearby, he found ammunition for a pistol and a shotgun. In addition, the corpse had another interesting thing that caught his attention. It was a camera, and therefore, he carefully began to remove it from the dead man's neck. Then, he wanted to look at the photos and videos that could be there, but in order to prevent the light from shining, he covered himself with a tablecloth. Now, he was safe. There was a folder with photos on the camera. Also, there were a lot of videos. He wanted to see and hear them all again. Only in this way could he understand what had really happened to its owner and why he was now dead. Also, the man set the flash. He waited and set the camera in a convenient place so that its flash would be very bright. The countdown started, and so he got ready. He knew that there were a lot of monsters in the other car, and before going there, he needed to make sure that it was safe there. Suddenly, the flashlight turned on. He started waiting, but nothing happened yet. Then he slowly started counting. I think there was no threat, and it was possible to go further. He even started walking. But he stopped when he saw what was really happening there. There were a lot of zombies in the next car, who just now started running in his direction. They quickly noticed the source of light, so it caught their attention. The hero had to open fire to stop them. He simply had no other choice. He fired, sparing no bullets, because he wanted to kill everyone who could prevent him from finding his family. After everything became very quiet, he began to move on. However, as soon as the flash caught fire, the mutants appeared again. There were so many of them that he did not have time to kill them all. He had to hide. It was lucky, because there was a space between the seats and the floor in which he could stay. The mutants really did not notice him, so they circled around the car. Using this, G began shooting again. Other zombies noticed the sounds of gunfire and flashes. One of them ended up very close to him, but Jai didn't panic. He simply opened fire. Suddenly, he noticed that the zombies managed to find the camera and now were holding it in their own hands. But it kept taking photos. Other mutants in the distance, down in the subway, noticed the bright light. They quickly understood what was happening. The light irritated them. He lifted the camera above his head because its bright light was attracting the attention of all the other mutants. Using this distraction, the boy chose the best moment and tried to escape. He tried to move quickly but understood they wanted to catch him. On the way, he had to shoot back. Suddenly, he managed to get into a new train car where there seemed to be no mutants. He heard the camera flashes and saw the light approaching him. The mutants were now in the same car and were trying to find him. Now they were trying to orient themselves only by sound. The man managed to hide from them by covering himself with a tablecloth. A zombie was so close that he could feel its breath. He also began counting, because soon the camera would flash again, and when the light appeared, they would definitely see him. But right before the flash happened, he fired and killed the mutant in front of him. After that, he began killing the others, shooting them down. When he ran out of bullets, he dodged their attacks and began to run. But one of the zombies managed to grab his backpack, so the man turned around and shot it right in the face. After that, he chose the same tactic, and to hide from more mutants approaching, he crawled under a seat. It was a very safe spot, so he calmly waited for them to appear. He also had the chance to reload his weapon to prepare for new shots. Luckily, he had plenty of ammo because he'd managed to find more. However, the camera would no longer help him, so he planned to use his flashlight instead. He was scared, because this operation was extremely risky. He understood that any mistake could lead to death. When he closed his eyes, for a moment he saw a vision of his daughter, who wanted to play with him and called him over. The man understood that the lives of his family and loved ones depended only on him. Now, feeling more confident, he was ready to begin. He turned off the flashlight and threw it far away from himself. Its bright light immediately attracted the zombies walking around the car, but this time, they didn't react to it as actively and continued searching for the main character. This gave him the chance to open fire, and he did. He began killing the mutants. He tried to shoot them directly in the head, making it easy to kill them. He was very surprised at how many zombies were in the train. This meant that a massive tragedy had happened here once. The people riding the train were trapped in deadly danger. This time, the mutants were much stronger and faster. Some of them even managed to survive after being shot, so he had to fire again. One of them even got dangerously close to the man. It tried to bite him, but G managed to defend himself with the metal frame of his shotgun. Why were these mutants so agile and strong? Now it was time for the pistol he also carried. His first shot hit the mutant right in the face. Then, as he carefully checked the car, looking for any zombies still alive, It was finally over, and now he could move on safely. Jai picked up his flashlight. But as it turned out, that wasn't the end, because he saw a strange silhouette in the train car ahead of him. Meanwhile, in one of the houses, some survivors remained. They couldn't leave their home, so they tried to gather food using special equipment. It was a drone, an irreplaceable tool during the epidemic. With it, they could deliver heavy items and exchange messages at a distance. The man who built this device for himself learned to control it and used it for his needs. Using a sponge and the drone, he managed to collect drinking water so he never had to leave the house. The woman living next door handled the cooking. They found food the same way, by sending the drone into stores and other abandoned buildings. Since they had no electricity, they had to cook on a homemade stove they used to make fire. They lived together with a father who was planning to leave the house to search for other people and supplies. They didn't want him to leave because it was extremely dangerous outside. The last time he tried to leave, he barely survived, and people only managed to save him by miracle. But he wasn't going to listen, and suddenly, they heard someone opening the door. The soldier prepared himself and was ready to shoot. In reality, it was the main character who had managed to find his relatives. It was his nephew, whom he hadn't seen in a long time, so they decided to talk and learn what had happened to the others. He told them that his older brother had gone to an island and left a note, so they might try searching for him there. But nobody knew if he made it there safely, or if he was even alive. But Jay knew that his brother was serving in the army when the epidemic began. The man, who was also a soldier, explained that at first nobody paid attention to it, but later they were given a new mission. Their unit was sent to areas that had lost control in order to create a blockade and not let anyone in or out. They moved in massive convoys, not realizing what danger awaited them, and they thought about how they would return home to their families. But suddenly, something strange began happening to one of the soldiers. One soldier simply fainted and collapsed on the ground. He had an unexplained seizure and could have died. They needed to call medics immediately and stop the transport to save the boy's life. Suddenly, the same started happening to the others. It became clear that many soldiers were infected with an unknown virus, so the survivors put on masks and left their vehicles. And it wasn't just them. The entire convoy was infected. Soon, people began turning into mutants. Chaos erupted. Zombies attacked those who couldn't escape the vehicles in time. Shooting began, and the few who survived had to fight off hordes of zombies. The uncle survived by miracle. Without the help of kind people, he would have died of hunger. Besides, his friend, who had previously been immune to the virus, mutated within seconds. It could be assumed that the virus was airborne, but no one was certain. The man still didn't know why so many soldiers were infected at the same time while others remained alive. This made the main character think. Moreover, in early stages, the virus caused acute inflammation. So how had the soldiers predicted that most people were infected? From the beginning, they knew much more than others, but even that information wasn't enough. Despite warnings, nobody believed in talk about zombies, and they couldn't imagine that the epidemic and all the chaos would become reality. At the time, all this was highly classified. No one was allowed to talk about it with outsiders. The soldiers also didn't want to abandon everything for their job and refused to leave their families. The authorities tried to hide the upcoming catastrophe. But how bad could it have been? And was the disaster global? However, there were islands where large groups of survivors existed, so there was still hope to return to normal life. The soldier had no choice. He couldn't reveal the incoming catastrophe. He simply followed orders. But the main character didn't blame him for what happened. He only wanted more information. The soldier understood that his family was in danger, but they all believed they could contain the virus and prevent its spread. But they failed, and now humanity was on the brink of extinction. The next evening, things got even worse. Now, terrifying mutants tried breaking in not through the roof, but through another room of the house. The room was locked, so they tried breaking down the door to enter the hallway. The men were prepared, and suddenly the door burst open. A horrifying mutant's head appeared through the opening. After that, furniture they had used to barricade the door began falling out of the room. They had to open fire to stop the zombie. But even that wasn't enough. The furniture was too massive, and the bullets didn't penetrate the wood. They were wasting ammunition, so they had to wait until the mutants fully appeared. And if they set the room on fire, trouble would follow. The blaze would spread rapidly, and they wouldn't be able to control it. They didn't even notice when the main character returned home and helped them defend the house. He brought a new ally with him, someone ready to assist. He had powerful weapons and was an experienced soldier who knew exactly what to do. The man began shooting. His weapon was so strong it easily pierced wood and struck enemies. The zombies began to flee because they were receiving lethal wounds. Many of them died. Now everything finally quieted down and the horrifying noises stopped. After that, they dared to look inside the room to see what had really happened. Inside, there were many bloodstains, but they didn't see anyone. It became clear that the mutants had managed to break through the stone wall they had been reinforcing for so long. Now, from the window, they saw the mutants running away. This was already the second attack, and most likely, the mutants had figured out the humans' tactics and now knew their location. They needed to think about this and reinforce the house much more next time, but then they discovered that their captive boy had escaped. This wasn't surprising. He was wild and had taken valuable food with him. The next day, the people began thinking of ways to fortify their home. Without the main character, everything was gloomy. But now that he came back, things felt livelier and more hopeful. During his absence, the men came up with a new plan and wanted to entertain themselves somehow. Faye imagined he was a character in a video game. It made him happy. Meanwhile, events shifted to a factory where a special prosthetic arm had been made for the girl. Now she could hold a bow again and practiced shooting. They managed to reach the main character's house and she decided to leave him a message. She fired an arrow tied to a special note toward the wall. It turned out the arrow was used as mail. This method had long been practiced by survivors. The man wanted to read the note as soon as possible to learn what she wanted. It turned out she wanted to speak with him because she had very important information. The men looked around and saw her on the neighboring rooftop. They immediately recognized their old acquaintance. They also noticed her arm was back and realized Tanya had made her a special prosthetic. She wanted to meet her in person to learn what she truly wanted. So they went to the neighboring building to talk. Chai was surprised that the girl managed to find him. But how did she do it? As it turned out, they had been watching him since last night, when he traded her brother for his family. But what did her father want? Did he have a new mission for them again? The girl understood he was hostile. Her father had ordered her to find them because the main character and his friends were talented and skilled soldiers. Now Jai wanted to learn more about the intelligent zombies. He hoped the opposing group had information about these creatures and had found a method to defeat them. It turned out they also suffered from their attacks. The creatures often approached dangerously close to their shelters. Because their factory was open, all work outside had to be stopped. Most likely, these creatures weren't interested in regular zombie meat. They hunted humans or cannibalized their own kind. But could a human turn into one of these intelligent zombies after infection? However, none of their people ever transformed into such mutants. Instead, after encountering them, they turned into regular, mindless monsters. But how did they learn that Jai's people were attacked by intelligent creatures? It was classified information, but they hoped for cooperation and were ready to share it if necessary. He became curious. How many of these creatures existed, and how long would their attacks continue? As practice showed, only a few of them came out at once while the others stayed hidden. As part of a partnership, they were ready to provide 250 kilograms of supplies. But Jai was not satisfied. Before making a decision, he needed to discuss it with his people. So when he returned home, they gathered in one room and began discussing the proposal. The supplies would barely last a few weeks, but they couldn't keep living in fear, constantly suffering from the intelligent mutants' attacks. The soldier who recently joined had a different opinion. He didn't know the state of their shelter, but after hearing their defenses were weaker, he realized they were all in the same boat and equally vulnerable. So he decided to agree. The other men tried to decide. They didn't trust strangers and didn't want to put themselves at risk. Making a final decision was extremely difficult. There were too many opinions, and nobody wanted to die for nothing. On top of that, the tension in the room grew. They needed to reach a united decision and solve the problem. As the leader, Jai had to make the final choice. Deep down, he agreed with the soldier. He knew only together they could defeat such strong enemies, so he wanted to join forces. The next day, they met with the opposing group to discuss cooperation details. Now that everything was settled, they headed to the place where the intelligent creatures lived. Their main nest was built like a fortress. The creatures usually appeared at night and rarely came out in daylight. They were extremely cunning, and killing them was difficult. If people simply attacked head-on, things could end very badly. They could even try burning the place down, but the building had too many exits. G had a different plan. He analyzed the situation. He decided to set up an ambush and kill them one by one as they left their shelter. And when only a few remained, they could finally storm the base and eliminate the rest. So when night fell, the people began preparing for the ambush. One of the bravest climbed a tower to watch their base. He used a thermal scope so he could track them even inside the building. At midnight, the mutants finally left their hideout and went hunting. It became clear they were extremely aggressive and wanted to kill anyone in their path. There were only 6 of them, and he reported their movements in real time. They walked down the street toward the girl with the bow. So the people prepared their ambush and waited for the perfect moment. When the mutants got close, they began shooting. People used melee weapons and spears, trying to strike them in the head. It began to work, but surprisingly, the zombies stayed alive. They didn't die even after multiple blows and shots. Once the zombies realized they were ambushed, they started to flee. But it wasn't that simple. In another hideout, the main character and the strongest warriors were waiting for them. He was ready to fight them openly, using the best weapons and gear. The people began to fight. Soon, all the enemies were destroyed, but they needed to hurry. They didn't want to attract more zombies. The next night, they did the same, but only managed to kill 4. On the 3rd night, only 2 mutants came out, and they were killed too. On the 4th day, something changed. The man didn't see anyone. That night, none of the mutants left their shelter. But they had to stay alert and report any movement immediately. The people prepared for an assault on the base and wanted to rest before it. The attack would take place in the morning, right after sunrise. So the people rested, gathering their strength for the upcoming battle. They tried to recover before the difficult fight. Meanwhile, new guards took shifts, watching the base and ready to wake everyone if something happened. Suddenly, one of them noticed something strange. A sharp spear pierced through his body. He fell from the tall building. Below, hungry mutants waited for him. The girl woke up from his scream and understood they were under attack. Behind her, she saw intelligent mutants who had found them and discovered their plan. There were many of these creatures. They began surrounding the people. In panic, everyone woke up, realizing they had fallen into an ambush. The mutants were everywhere, countless in number. A real army of starving creatures stood against the survivors. A brutal battle began, but the people were unprepared and heavily outnumbered. Many of them immediately began dying while trying to stop the mutants. The main character and his friends managed to survive and reach the house. They tried shooting back, but the monsters quickly stormed the house and got inside. Now they had to run, killing every enemy on their path. They left the house and moved along a narrow edge. But the mutants closed in and began chasing them. Suddenly, one of them grabbed Faye's bag. Because of this, he lost his balance and began falling. Jai couldn't lose him, but the situation became extremely dire. Faye was about to die, and Jai couldn't allow that. The man crashed painfully from the height. Mutants were everywhere. Even there, they began chasing him. The impact was so strong he couldn't get up, and he started bleeding. Now he was completely defenseless. The zombies approached him, and when they found his body, they dragged him toward their hideout. The main character began shouting to him, trying to wake him up. He wanted to jump down to help him, but understood it was too dangerous. He couldn't save him. Meanwhile, other mutants were catching up to them. As before, they fired at them, but it didn't help. These creatures were incredibly hard to kill. All they could do was knock them down. Now they needed to climb as high as possible. They rushed upward to see where the mutants were taking their friend. Immediately, the men began pursuing them. They jumped from building to building, trying to catch up. But on their way, they saw the man who had been watching everything. He had been brutally killed, his body lying on the ground. But Jai took his scope with night vision capabilities and quickly ran to the building's edge to see everything with his own eyes. He began observing. The main hideout of the mutants was located in a former hospital building. That's where they dragged all the captured people. The people were still alive, meaning they could still be rescued. But going there alone would be incredibly dangerous. Now they faced a nearly impossible mission. The men could not abandon their friend. They had been together since childhood. They had always done everything together and helped each other in the worst moments. Even the day they first met, he remembered for life. Because that day they fought others while defending each other. It was the first time in their lives they had to protect someone and stand together. Back then, the boys got into conflict with much older guys who were stronger. The older ones accused them of trespassing on their territory. But the boys disagreed, so the older ones mocked them. They didn't believe kids could be so brave and reckless to resist them. At that moment, he pulled out a knife, thinking he was a real gangster. He planned to give them tattoos to commemorate their first meeting. Just as he was about to strike them with the knife, the main character appeared and ordered everyone to stop. He bravely stepped forward and forced the older boys to back off. They were stunned when they saw him, because they realized the main character wouldn't back down and would protect the younger ones. He had prepared. In his back pocket, he had stones he planned to defend himself with. He didn't know whether they could beat two strong opponents, but he promised himself he'd try to protect those kids. They were his brothers, and he wouldn't let anyone hurt them. His reckless behavior enraged the older boy, who ordered his friends to attack. He himself intended to stab the main character with the knife, but G struck first, hitting him in the head with stones. The fight began. It was so brutal that the younger kids had to bite the older ones just to protect themselves. They did everything they could to win and punish the arrogant bullies. When they finally won, they formally introduced themselves and became real friends. From that moment on, they were always together. They helped and protected each other whenever danger came. Over time, the main character became their leader, and together they took on different challenges. He remembered all of it, and even now, in the worst moment, he decided to try to save his friend. He knew the mutants were zombies, but it was strange that they didn't bite his friend. Clearly, they wanted to use him as bait. Meanwhile, other survivors managed to find them. They wanted to take his weapons because their own friends had disappeared too and were dragged into the police station, the mutants' base. But they needed a new plan, because charging into the building and killing all the enemies was impossible. It was incredibly dangerous. These mutants were extremely strong and intelligent. They could use unknown tactics and attack again when people were defenseless.